What's inside? I have an idea. Someone wants to do it. So get ready. And I don't use the salt. And I don't use the water. That's just for the law. The rest brother. Get over here and talk about it. Does anybody want to show us how to check the night? The Rabbi, you have to go look where you come from. Do you imagine you put your tongue on the edge of the knife? Even for ratings, I'm not asking to do it. Yeah, we get. Ravaka Bar Yaakov, what did they put the side? Yaakov. Yaakov, what did the side? Take a little here and run it down and see if it gets stuck. Mr. Rabbi, Mr. Alpha, if you're going to check me, this will be the butter. Then you need to use meat to see if it gets stuck. Well, you have to use your finger to see if you can cut that out. You can't use here, you can't use other stuff. No, it doesn't go. They don't. They go very, very easy. It's disturbs me very soon. I tried it out when I was going for the class. All right, Papa. I didn't very good. Sriko Abistro says a Papa. You need to check it for 2 days. Abistro on your finger. Abistro on your nail. What's the Papa? I was going to do it over this time. I'm really nervous. Okay, let's see. Okay, fine. Anyways, on all three, you have to check it on this side, check it on the spitz, and check it on this side. So that's 3. So says the Gemara. Someone said in your name, you said in the name of Rabbi. You need to do a bdika on the meat, on your finger, on your nail, and on 3 sides. So that's 3 times 2. That's 6. But you also have to go back and forth, so it's 12 degrees. You see also that's Jose. Here again, you have the 3 sides. Huh? Oh, How many times did it happen? How many times did it happen that your father started putting the challah on the wrong side of the night? Okay. Oh my leg, I built you up. So he said, no, they said in my name, I said you should use your finger, I said you should use the nail. But I didn't say you have to check 3 sides. 1 side is enough, the sharpie. Yes, you're right. I said you have to check it on your finger and on your nail and on all 3 sides. I never said it in the name of Rabbi. I said somebody else, not in the name of Rabbi. So they brought a knife to Rabbi, she said, check it out. Oh, my lady, Rabbi, so Rabbi passes it on and says, you check it. I want to see how you do check it. So he checked it. I took on his nail. Now, this one is That those who call on all three sides. On the Gisha, perfect. Okay, no Murakami passed the test. Okay, Omar, I took this with 3 times. You need to check you need to use your nail and your fingers. Once you call let's you come, but not on 3. Right? We learn about Omar is there on Shmuel. We didn't sack him in Shabbat. Oh, she does say Shero. I'll remind you this famous case we had. He takes a knife, he puts it in the fire, he makes it red hot, and then he does shkita. So what was the most problem with that? Remember? Burning the esophagus and the trachea with the sides of the knife. Before you finish up the shkita, you're going to make a tray by burning. What did the Gemara say? No, it's not always. It's taut, and the sharpness of the knife goes in first. And before the side of the knife has any chance to touch the sides of the conversation, it pops open. It's really expands. As soon as you poke it, it pops open. So in Mela, he's saying the sides of the knife never touch the conversation. It's only the sharpness. So what's the point of checking the sides of the knife? And with that we finish. Let's just read it inside. Leave inside the shulchan doesn't share it. Should do it because the sharpness goes in before the heat. You can't show no make it done. We ask, but what about the size of the knife? You're gonna burn. It expands, it pops open, doesn't let you touch off. And now it makes the shkita miva for a boy side. Have a wonderful day and have a great time. I think about the Malta. We'll see you. Everybody have a safe trip back. Please go shalom. I'll see you inside. Please go shalom.
America's Swift is spreading Torah throughout the world. Sponsor a share today. Andy White sponsor AndyWhite.com.
Shabbos Rabbi side. We just watched the University of Mordechai live in Morocco in the banyan tree. The nicest hotel that I've ever been to. Empty water, top of the top, just flying. Only the best. The best, I'll tell you that. Ain't that meals, but walking my serious. I want to mention our unbelievable eateries, the ones who organize the whole trip. You see it's got Shimi Weiss, and all the guys that are working very hard and tirelessly. So wherever we went, we had 3 singers in a band, and for Shabbos, 5 singers and no band. It's just incredible. We have 2 of the top speakers in Kleisville today, Iron Yossi and Shushan. Together, they managed to yesterday. We had instead of a cheer, comic relief. It's just spontaneous, good vibes, good toughness. It was unbelievable. Wherever we go, of course, it's Torah. Right now, we're just calling for Shabbos. We're sitting in Torah this morning here for an hour. And it's Torah, it's Chatzi Lachem, Chatzi Hashem. It's a lot of Gashmius, and a lot of Ruchnius, and a lot of Habershaf, and bonding, and seeing great places, and doing it's unbelievable experience, unbelievable. And I'm very much looking forward to Shabbos. Shabbos Kodesh is going to be unbelievable. A few things. I want to mind are with the spiritual owner, so depending on where you are and what you are, this might be the day, this might be the day. Spiritual owner is the first on the business. For Kedusha's murder, B'Shrov and Leah Esther for Shlema. Lord, I have the boundaries. I want to be selfish. I want to be able to see the view. So that's pretty much my only chance today. Or this trip. I was home. I was really counting on going after the shit. It was going to be 2 hours. I was going to go, and then the internet fell. We put it back up, and the kids. This we saw yesterday. So these are the security guards. This me, and then you have Benny's son, who's 10 years old. I don't know if his father is real. The AI sends him a message. This funny shot very well. He says, "There it is. Here. Oops. Maybe I have to click it in." ממש מעולה. Let me do the show. This. Yeah, he calls you daddy. Very interesting. Shalom Brother Rabbi, I'll try to be short. Suffering that base, 7 days, which equals 2,000 days straight of prayer. The emails that say I've never missed a day are definitely a possible accomplishment, but Sifros is incomparable to fragmented learning. At the same time, however, even if one can't say that they never missed a day, there's still some learning mentality. Each day stands alone, and so no matter what happened yesterday. Thank you for 2,000 days. See my email from November 24th, 2020. Yaakov Shalom Schreiber. He has composed a song called Shabbos, sung with my brothers. My brothers-in-law, my son-in-law's name is Ruben. I didn't get this period. Makes no difference. So this I thought was very interesting because they got in the same day. Very, very behind in emails. But we'll try to copy some good ones. 2 of them from a yeshiva buffer and a prayer guide. So mainstream, so to speak. I'm a buffer in yeshiva, Baruch Hashem, I'm successful in my learning. However, during my breaks, I started getting into watching movies and TV shows. One of my friends suggested MDY, and at first I brushed it off saying that. So what I did it for Buffer Yeshiva, I love it. The Buffer Yeshiva, but movies are okay, but the feeling is terrible. I learned MDY, I learned MDY from my doctor, but he insisted saying, I would love it, it's interactive and contained, etc. So I decided to join school. Now I know I shouldn't speak too soon, but since we started, changed it. Instead of going to my room at breaks to watch movies, I now go to watch the shit. Even though I've learned this part of school in the past few days and learning at a whole new level, perhaps the picture I really hope it goes to the whole and if it pocket T-A-K-K-E-H goes well, maybe I'll continue with the pirates. Thank you so much. Atzlacha G'dayla. Dear Rabbi Baruch Hashem, my letter is not like all the other letters. I understand my letters in the letters. Baruch Hashem, I learned incredibly all day, truly enjoy my learning and have tremendous satisfaction. In the evening, when I no longer have the concentration to keep learning, I enjoy watching the shiur, usually just the video, and it gives me a real sense of time. Your voice, when in parentheses somebody says I usually just watch the videos, that means I watch the shiur at one speed from beginning to end, not even a 1.2 speed. That's usually what it means. That's code. That's my code. I've spoken to enough people to know that that's what it means. What? 0.75. And sometimes he does Charzara 3 or 4 times. But he's a fair guy, so he says, listen, I don't always watch whole shiur. A lot of times it's just the videos. Right? Now when a Balabas says it, but the Balabas tells me, listen, I watch the shiur every day, I'm doing well. That's code for I see my friend's status once a month. Maybe once every 2 weeks, I saw that Ishmaka video of 30 seconds. That's what I mean. That's the Yisrael. So, thank you very much. I wanted to point out a few things. There's a video about sending the Yisrael Avishtaleh, and it appeared that the lottery box was made of gold, or specifically says it was made out of wood. The Arushfa, they did a knockout with water. Not wasting means the hard rock. They're great. Shkoya. This is from a woman in her Yisrael who said, I have to let you know, I've been down with my husband, who's a great guy, he's a yeshiva product, and he tries to learn whenever he can. We tried here and there, it didn't really work. And I'm diving for years. I finally found the shear. It's mamish a treasure under the bridge. The kind of the Gula page, he says. It's mamish here close to where we live. It's a beautiful atmosphere. Blah, blah, blah. Good Shabbos. All right, Rabbi side. The official edition, NDY Shots, is sitting right next to me on my left. Yosefta, Zev, Danielle, Shuhal, Eric, the Benedict family. We're working, Noam and I, and our staff, because it's a full-time job, it's Shots. We're working on that. Meyer is going to come to me one day, but in all seriousness, he's going to say, yeah, now also no. When he really comes and says, listen, this is the best investment in the world. Mom, she got a great deal. That's what we're working for. It's going to happen soon. Dav Tez Zayin by Rabbi Yaakov Blayis, for marrying the father, by Reuven Ben, with Frank Fisher's Rabbi. So he just did one. He just did that spot or something. Okay. Dave Salmon dedicated memory of Murray with Shmuel Barker, Frank Steve Doug's Rabbi. Culture Town Foundation graduating to the consortium and the alliance, and all they do is support MDY. Now, Mr. Sutherland, we got you this, and thank you for Chief Ben. Anonymous, we believe for Shneman, Eric Zimmer, to lay by Sessom, Yemen, Daniel, Rosenfeld, Reese, Silva. I don't know that we're giving share, they don't really care, they're in the spot right now. That's it. Whatever they decide to do, they do. I decided with the first name of Mary, Miriam, Yemen, Daniel, Rosenfeld, Baruch Michelle. What's your looking market? Our weekly sponsors, probably supporting the Union Spanish, which they were adapted to Lulu, Meshulam Deer, Mazel Tov, Yaakov Schreiber, on your seer. It's supposed for you, and which they were from the Power Bash Schleitz. Howard Wimmer, Minister of Murray, Chaim Avram Ben Achim, and in honor of Bernie Leathad, who got me to MDY 2 years ago this week. I need Bird, Valder, Anonymous, Adler Turi, Levat. How do you pronounce it? Fully average. Oh, fully average. One of the biggest investors in Jewish education worldwide. I heard a lot about it. All right. Anonymous, the merit of Shidduch for son of the past. No? Daniel Kahan, in love memory of Hannah Bassisro, Moshe on the yard side, Yom Yerushalayim. Mayor Dambi, oh, we missed Mayor. Where's he? This one's for Joachim Getzel, Ben Yitzchak Alevi, Raymond, Jacob Savage, and
I see some athleticism.
and Ruben Ben Fiord. HYK and TV first success. Come on, knowing the Neil, rough over her. That's it. Go get Everyone can sponsor more into the original series, school for people from the Paygo. And if you use that's Haya, it's a big split for us that Morty Rubin and everything going around. He's here. Where is he? This guy is not so cool. You get what I say? This is what I'm going with. Bring that over for a second. I want to tell you, this beautiful road. Check this out. Next trip, Nelson Klein is going to do a custom-made road for my official. If you're going to come 3 months before, with 4 different sizes, you go up or go down the waist. The official edition road. And like I said, this right here is Game as edition road. Look at the paddle. Look at it. It's not a joke. You want that? Great. What else do we have? FDYR month. We're still on the man by Shabbat Bracha. Oh, the big split was, I was going to say, the Morty Rubin. Got on the plane, he came just for Shabbos. He did an unbelievable job of just all the stuff that has to do with Morocco and the history and different things and Hungary and just doing a format. We spent hours upon hours and hours upon hours on our website. He just showed me a brand new app, MDY app. So you should have done the things that are testing my Shabbos. It's a big surprise to start morning. Turning it down. Not there yet. Okay. We're excited. What's the you're right. I wonder why. Anyway, before Shlomi Yohanan comes in Hashem Bracha. Before Shlomo Mordechai ben Esther. Before Sayel Danilo said, then Sayel Esther. Guys, have it design on that. All right. So it's the book name. You have 30 procedures and usual mama turning out to be fascinating. If somebody checks with a wheel in the machine, there is a picture. Here's the movie. So there's a wheel, but the wheel itself is not what's really funny. There's a knife on the bottom of the wheel. It's a little sideways. Okay, you get the idea. And you put the animal this way and step. By you pushing some lever which turns the knife, which cuts the animal. Says in Gemara, it's a good shita, even though it's on a wheel, it's like a machine. Mostly it's like a mechana, like a machine. But it says somewhere else that we even mentioned it, the shita is possible. So you use the machine, it's possible. It'd be great. Imagine you put a knife on a machine, and all the thing you have to do is move animals past the machine, cut, you don't have to do anything instead. Take out. Oh, the time is infected. There's a machine they used to use to make earthenware. Today, I know that they have machines that spin the earthenware, and with your hand, you mold it in some way. That's what it is. I have no idea. So they used to use a machine. And that is considered playapapa. The power of the person, the human being, pushing the pedal with his foot, with his hand, it's a human power. Like a bicycle. A bicycle would be human power. You go like this, and you're empowering with your leg. Oh, the sound of it. We have what is this called in English? A wheel that turns from the water. The water wheel, okay? Water fact. Was indicated in 52 BC when she was made a regent. A water wheel, it gets all its power from, doing zero intervention at all. And that turns and spins the light. That's no good. Now, there is one situation where a water wheel would be okay. Water mill. And that's the mill. There's not a mill. It's for sheep. What is the case where a water wheel works? It's okay. When you open up the water and the liquid plus the water starts to wheel up the spin. That is considered human power. Why? Because your human power. You open up the water came. 5 seconds later, however many seconds it is, 2 to 5, it's already no longer human power. That is already from the water. A great example would be, you're on a plane, you're in a restaurant somewhere, there's no water thing, you have to wash your ass. What do? You want to watch Lego Master in the morning, you want to go on a plane. You're on the United flight, and you want to watch. What do? So, a good idea to be is to push the water and stick your hand in it immediately. Or stick your hand, push the button. Stick your hand out, you have to wait for it to stop, and then you do it again. There's only like 25 pushes like that on the plane, and the water runs out, so you gotta be careful. Yeah? So that's what they say. No. Y'all see. Can you do anything about this water? I was watching, was at a steer, and a cat came by, and Rabbi Yossi ben Shushan said, muffle up, and the cat died on the spot.
Following her accession, she traveled south to Thebes to take part in Egyptian religious rites that signified her accession as Pharaoh of Egypt. This was the ancient capital.
No, seriously, you don't need to be on a trip. They're all 7 days. You have to become brothers.
Synonymous
big, and I can't wait to the Shabbos. I want to put pressure on them. Just remember, Yossi, hopefully you can't make me cry. It's all about the Shabbos, yeah? It's easy, you can't. You have to all the same, all the sirens. Look at you. Now they work on these stubborn. And even with the water, we know there's a way that's smoother, the shepherd, and the way lost. Because look at the definition. The initial burst of water is considered your force. Your force, you're that good speech. Of the change, but once you, whatever the change is, 2 seconds later, 5 seconds later, the complete location of the wheel, then it's already, or whatever it is, I'm not sure, something, it's already not your path, it's already water that's going to continue going. Imagine, I turn on, I opened up the dam, and now it's my path for 45 years. No way. It lasts only for a few seconds, and that's it. Then the rest is that sand pushing the water through. The Gemara that's all a great story. I'm on the capital of somebody ties up his friends. The Ashkelon, they put them in some sort of still water. And listen, the guys drown. I know why. Usually they use down again. These are like shooting out at somebody. Only shot up the water and please that. The 100 more penetration. The initial force. The training grown down the one, the second floors. Whatever that means, that he's fought them. The mother, the video, the one, 2, 3 months. I recommend everybody behind the scenes something to this was a force of 2,000 engineers and 500 men. They arrived as part of the Palestinian forces from Syria to restore Ptolemy XII to the throne. Afterwards, they remained in Egypt, began to adopt Egyptian customs and play a role in its politics. The Kavinyana, as they became known, began to experience greatest support for Cleopatra's brother, Ptolemy XIX, as time went by, a development which made our position more difficult. This is the most recent video I've ever done. These issues in a variety of ways. The failure of the inundation and the decline in agricultural produce that it brought about was remedied by stopping Egypt's export of large agricultural. This was aimed at balancing So no one's going to remember that last time. You know? In 50 BC, so go wrong. You enjoying it? That's okay. It's okay. Go. Yeah. Lots of Rabbi players that ever killed. So you are my son. Well, in Yeshiva, not like this. Let's say Rabbi sitting where I'm sitting. A palm is sitting right in front. And then he's at a certain point, he sat behind Rabbi. He was in row 2. He wasn't up front. When I go to the States, I'm going to say years. So in order to put in row 1, boom, sat there. You know, guys in the queue for one time, and then guys in the queue, row 2, row 1. I was in 07.
Crassus is
Like 3 years.
defeated by the Parthians
Yeah.
at Takara
What?
in 53 BC, brought to an end political
Who?
alliance that had existed
Rabbi?
in Rome since
Yesterday?
60 BC.
Listen,
Pompey was the first triumvirate. This
You
had
also have a higher
Crassus,
here.
Pompey,
Who's
and
Rabbi
Gaius
no?
Julius
Who's
Caesar,
Rabbi You
a
wrote the
second
prices.
archrival of Pompey's.
You also have a
The
higher
establishment of the first triumvirate was just
Rabbi
followed
sits in front of Rabbi.
in the process of Rome's
Rabbi says, the night is I don't know, Shkita must be done or something.
just
Deep
15
catch to the
years
ground.
before
Can't be up catch to the ground. Shalem
this
you
had
can I'm
resulted
not
in
telling
the
you.
Roman general
Bro, if you would take the night,
Julius Caesar
gets
briefly becoming dictator of the Roman
So,
after he had won
the
briefs
Rabbi says this
against
whole
the
thing here, how do you prove from here? It's a loving fire, okay. So, one is let's see the Shkita.
and died
It isn't a cup.
in retirement.
You want to put something that's deep down.
His actions
Why else would
had
we destabilize
destabilized the Republic
all the way around, all the way up to Rab. So Rab is sitting in the room to catch his, kid or his little one. My comment, what are you talking about? What is Rabbi talking about?
Caesar
So listen, kind of puts it, see the football. All the way, from the scene of this football. I'm very proud of Yoshi. I told him I don't like what another artist did. Because the other artist, and it's goes to come to one of the stuff in the show. He did it with the grain. I felt to be against the grain. I like that stuff better. So this is more like it. Against the grain. Rather than talk against the grain, you have a ton of cuts in the butt. It's split up. So in like 23 seconds, it sends it back to reversion, and it's all good. So basically, you say your kid comes around, you're right. This is Italian folks. I really understand. I don't think everybody is talking about. I think that's basically what you said. Ready, but they don't punish. How do you do?
Caesar led his legions south and famously crossed the
Choose a right or a wrong middle. Next thing, listen. Bro, you said that wrong to my point. Who is telling you now that this culture is the right of the culture? Fire is just telling us what a wrong deal, how reasons. Those reasons. Don't go shots. You don't want to have any issue with
48 BC.
looking for knife. I'm going to get there, I'm going to have it. I'm going to do it.
Caesar crossed to
It
Greece.
reminded me of something like a cheer himself. He brought a knife to Morocco
In a
to
battle
have
which
Jesus.
ancient accounts portrayed as a formidable victory for Caesar,
Yeah, just, so you could say that.
he managed to break
Then I felt good. Because you told me to stay the night. I thought you were working yourself. And hopefully you won't have to stop so then I can cheer. You're just watching bed. You go to bed every time. Every time you swing around.
His cause was
Yeah.
not lost.
Don't worry about
Many
it. I'm
supporters of his in places like Israel
Hey, listen.
and North Africa
If there's blood, it's better that it's green. What wrong on my son? Who's not wrong on my son?
a prominent senator
Talk to you tomorrow. Oh, my
had
wrong.
an army in the province of Africa around what is now
One of the
Tunisia,
store, we have it. Oh,
intended
it's
to fight
this.
on against Caesar here. Taking stock of this, Pompey decided to sail for Egypt, where he hoped to acquire further support from the Ptolemaic dynasty and presumably link up
Shit,
with
the lead.
Gaius' forces
All
to
of
make
us,
North
like, kid,
Africa
bro.
the
You didn't
center
have
of
a
his
desire.
wars.
Have the party.
He would have
The
assumed
first
that he
love
would
is starts
receive
out
support
talking about a
from
desire.
Cleopatra,
And then he brings it back down with
eventually
Sugia when
being
it comes to
provided
street.
her
Now what?
and her father a decade
How do
earlier.
we view something that used to be bad and you made it something bad? For instance, a brick.
Pompey sailed first
It's
for
like a home.
Cyprus,
Everything in this hotel right here behind us,
arriving
all
there
these
in
beams,
late September
what's the
48
behind
BC.
detached.
When
Right?
he arrived
The
to
detached. Once
Cleopatra's
the
land, he was
detached
killed
from the ground. So
immediately.
these are all man-made materials.
A party of
Detached.
mercenaries, led by Lucius
So when you take those
Septimius,
detached
a
and
military
you
officer
attach it, and now becomes a cover,
in his
is it not a lock of detached or attached? Which one is it?
which had conquered the
So,
Seleucid
the Allah
Empire
already
50
got
years
us. They
earlier,
told us that
stabbed him to death, and then beheaded him.
you cannot become an easy nearby enough. So I worship a mountain.
It is probable that
If
the
he
Ptolemies
worships a mountain,
just
well,
murdered
he's
the
already, you
gift
cannot
of
make the mountain
Caesar's
up.
victory.
You can make an
Was
animal
inevitable
up, so
in
you
the
can
Civil
detach.
War.
You can make a glass type of desire.
Pompey's
But you
decision
cannot make a
to
mountain.
leave
Why? Because
Egypt
the mountain
to
is
go for the
the
Battle of
public.
Phasaelus
What about a house?
change the trajectory
What about a house? You make a house out of the Tsar. That's his
within
job.
a few days of Pompey's death.
How can
It
you
became
explain? Only way to explain
that
it.
Caesar
He
was
has to be
about to
detached and
himself
attached
to
down.
Egypt,
So
having
the fact that
learned
it's
what his
attached down doesn't make it
plans
attached.
were.
So therefore he says, you see what happened there? There's someone behind
Before
me.
he could
In the
establish
morning,
any
we're on the
boundaries
opposite.
in Africa,
It's weird how that happened.
he was apparently genuinely upset to learn that Pompey had been killed, and then his body defiled by beheading him. When he came to Alexandria,
I've never been, this is, I have to say this out loud, because I know you're thinking it.
the civil war was far from
This is the first time
and
that
despite
I can
Pompey's
think
death,
of that
Cato and others,
so everyone
including
wants to
Pompey's son,
stop the Morocco for a few more weeks. Yes, what, Pump's gonna bomb? Yeah, I think it's happening. And what are we gonna do? What was the thing? Saying for 3 weeks? Oy, what about the kids? Oy, Jim, boys, please, Bob, please. First time ever. Wow.
To some extent, she was outside of Alexandria at this time, and simply to Caesar that she wished to meet with him. According to a detailed account left by the Greco-Roman historian Cassius, she, quote, beautified herself so as to appear before him in the most majestic and at the same time pity-inspiring guise. When she had perfected her schemes,
So here I want to stop
she
for a
entered
second.
the city and by
This is
night,
about it today.
without famous knowledge, went to
I'm talking about the
Paris.
I believe it's a common thing in Israel. We don't have that much in our control, especially in the neighborhoods that we live in. We are neighborhoods, the nice neighborhoods, and so we're not a big family. In America, you have a couple of the bikes. Right, cool. So when you see people, I know guys in his 80s that split the house. Mom's in his 80s. And what are you thinking? By the time it's done, by the time you move in, what's going on here? Seriously. And people know, people start building these houses in the 50s, 60s, 50s, 30s. So, you can stop it. You can go, you find the marble from here, you do that. What's beautiful? When we built a beautiful house in Chicago, right? 11,000 square feet. One of my friends built 11,000, what I said, 11,000 square feet. And one of my friends, his wife, I just saw her, she's 500, very famous film lady, very famous. They built a house with a basketball court inside. I was like, oh, and the next guy, I'm not, we can't make this stuff up. Yeah, the basketball court, a pool and a basketball court. And one of the guys, one of my best friends, Charlie Shield, I even gave a bunch of shoes. He has a pool that makes behind the streets pool looks like mountains, like a mixta and Mishar. The board recording. The point is that no matter what you have, yeah, I thought about it. Hey, yesterday was unbelievable. I built a hotel once, and my family was in a hotel. We had a hotel full of food, and I really appreciated this hotel. This hotel was designed in Moroccan. I had a room there. I don't know if you guys saw this Moroccan restaurant. The cigar bar and the ceiling with and then you come here and like that's garbage. It's not garbage. Like if we would have stayed there, I would have not happy. Like shoppers in the Radisson of the Marriott, sorry, yeah. Marriott is Paris. One of the nicest hotels I've been to, period. Eliza.
And as the weeks ticked by,
And then I remember when we got here, told me this morning, he said, you know the biggest thing on this? The biggest thing on this. When you get up to your neighbor, they show you an unbelievable mansion. You look at the store and you see the pesticide of the guy next to you. That is Gehenna. Gehenna! You're in the neighborhood of Gehenna. No?
because she was exiled to
What?
Pioneer and took sanctuary,
Whatever, I mean Gehenna.
killing her.
You can't even use it. You can't even use it.
Was the unchanged ruler of Egypt once again.
I'll just
The issue of
move
female
out of the
role
way.
was still a problem in Egypt, and in order to shore up her position, Cleopatra installed her mother, young
That's
ruler,
I'm talking
as
about
her
actually, but the point is that
47 BC.
if you get a physics, you get a
To
physics.
confuse
At the end of
matters
the day,
further,
even
he
if
was,
when you get
quite
up to the Uganda, it's
unsurprisingly,
illegal with the
called Ptolemy
these
as well.
rivers, exactly, and open for
Clement
use,
XIII, as he
it's
now
going to
became,
hurt.
was the
How much more
youngest
you could
member
have
of the
had.
family,
And you
but
don't
was
realize
only
how much more you
around
could have until you see it.
12 years
You know,
old
it's,
at the time.
we didn't know that
His
this is a
exact
Muslim.
birth date is
This is a
not
Muslim.
known. A
I'm
rich,
going to holiday, you know?
sibling marriage was also entered into. Cleopatra's ambitions were expanding by then. She was pregnant with Caesar's child. This was an important development. Despite marrying multiple times, Caesar had only had one child from his marriages,
So if you
a daughter
bow
named
to your own
Julia,
house,
who had died
sorry,
in
you make your
54
house
BC.
up. These are the that are coming over,
Which
these
had
are the your house,
accelerated
this
the
is
drift
over. And hey, I'm not the law
As
is
she
harder
had
than
been
the
married to Pompey
the law
as part of the
that
alliance
the
arrangements
Muslims
for the
that
first
real
triumvirate.
gods are on the
Thus,
mountain,
while
but not the
Cleopatra gave
mountains
birth
are
to
the
a
god.
baby
The
boy in
mountain can't
Egypt
be a god. The
sometime
mountain
in
can't
the
be a
second
good
half
god.
of 47 BC,
Just God is
most
on the
likely
mountain.
the late summer
The
or
Muslims,
early
because the
autumn.
famous descendant
It was
who
a
has
quite
this the
significant
Zara last
development.
really hard another thing.
Caesar
And a mountain
now
that's
had a
over can't be
biological male
another
son,
Zara. You can't see it.
albeit one
And the
born
main
to
law,
an Egyptian
that's what
mother.
why a house is
The
awesome. The
latter
answer
issue
is
was
because that house
problematic and meant
started out
Caesar
down the
would have
river and
serious
you made
difficulties
the river
getting
and the
the
main
local
law.
political classes to accept the child as his heir, even though he was the unquestioned ruler of Rabbi, having claimed
No, man,
12
let me do
girls. The child was named Caesarion. By the time he was born, Caesar had left Egypt to oversee the upgrading of markets to Cato, another former ally of Pompey. Thus, Cleopatra set off from Egypt with her newborn child in 46 BC to visit Rome. She would spend the next 2 years living there.
Depends where, depends what.
Cleopatra's presence in Rome was viewed poorly by many in the
Now we
political
have a
class
beautiful.
of the city.
Let me show you this again. If you don't remember this
As an
video.
Oriental
Oh, first of all, Elohim Alahar. Here's Elohim Alahar. One
People
thing.
raised eyebrows about Caesar's relationship with her and the possibility of him acknowledging Caesarion as an heir. A development like this would have been unthinkable amongst the Roman elite a century earlier. But Caesar had proved time and time again that he was impervious to convention and would not be bound by tradition. This was evident in his refusal to relinquish power.
So you can't make
Caesar
a higher outrageous dollar. Why would somebody why would somebody want to work about
on the grounds that the military emergency necessitated emergency powers. But now, with the Civil War winding down and his powers set to expire, he proclaimed his wish to become dictator for life.
Now,
The
what is that?
Romans were
This is one of my
opposed to the
favorites.
idea of
It's
kingship.
a recent one.
There was great opposition to his decisions.
In order for any
Some
food item
people
to become common,
associated
it has to be
Cleopatra
mixed with
with
common.
this,
Somehow it has to
claiming
have.
she was bad influence on the Roman
First of all,
people.
you
These
put one of the
included
seven
great Roman
liquids on
orator
water,
and rhetorical
blood,
writer
water, food.
Cicero, who
You
knew
freeze that.
Cleopatra and wrote unfavorably about her. From Cicero's letters, Rose had learned that Cleopatra might have become pregnant again while in Rome on the child of Caesar's, though if she did, she lost the baby. The Egyptian would also lost her love before too long. On the 15th of March, 44 BC, the Ides of March festival in the Roman calendar, Caesar was stabbed to death by a co-water senators in Rome who had decided he was intent on becoming a tyrant and needed to be stopped. With his assassination, everything was in flux in the Roman world once again. After the murder of Caesar, Cleopatra only remained in Rome for long enough to have it confirmed that Caesarion would not be named Caesar's heir in his will. Once this was clear, she left coldly. Her son would now have no time for anyone seeking to succeed Caesar as the preeminent figure in the crumbling Roman Republic. She consequently headed back to Egypt and
Now, I want to tell you a few more things. if you want to use the water for any other purpose, stop. You want to use the water, and then that water touches your fruit, it's also not good out for you. You don't need to want the water to go in your fruit. You need to want the water, let's say, to wash out your pot. Then the water is not right? Even if it's whatever that usage was, even if it wasn't for food, it's considered clean. But actually something that's not equivalent either. Let's say I want water to wash my roof. I want the water to wash down. And then the water goes into my roof. It's not for clean. You know why? Because that water was for the food. That water is good enough to go on the screw and make the roof out of them because I wanted the water to wash out like this and like this is not good enough. Essentially, you've got the floor that took over the top so that my wall that is painted shouldn't get wet. Because that's for the wall and not for something that's over, which is a wall. As well as the guy. I'm still, when I was still share this, I had to be, I think, talking about this, but it doesn't matter. I said anyway, I'm not going to be stuck. It's this person. It's in itself. I don't know if anybody knows, but to me, it seems like you're building a lot of fighting. And you're fighting for things that are less important than the important. But you shut down for a long time. I haven't heard one thing. One person started breaking the nose, but I was like, oh, like, man. Oh, that's so nice. That is really crazy. They broke it and all this. But it's like, I'm not I understand. It's something people make a bigger fuss out of it than me. And I don't get to some I think it's fair, yeah, it's fine, potentially. Maybe people was more comfortable. I don't know, people might tell me that. You know they do that. I'm just saying what it was different. I don't remember anybody making a call. It was so shut down for a long time. People don't walk around with it. Okay, right there. Oh, it's happening in July today. We're in July. She said nothing. Caesar's killers defeated in 2 minutes in less than 42 BC. What's the catch? Oh my God, sometimes we should do the hareza b'chitan. If you do it to wash out a fish, that's considered good water to make mashed up. Because you did it by so you can occur. But you did it to wash the wall. Washing the wall is not good water. If you flipped over the dish, if you flipped the wall, these three figures obtained Antony and the Iblis formed a political alliance known as the Second Triumvirate in 43 BC. Through this, they came to share other places in Ma'ara, other places in the wall of the place of Ma'ara became the power struggle between Batavia and took out a cave that was a cave. The wall was there for fish manipulation, so that's not a part of it. You have a wall, look, a hotel wall, a hotel that's man-made. So even though it's a America, it's not considered a So there's a lot of things being fucked up. You want to say, I got that part out, but you should do that. Can you flip over a phone on a wall?
However,
Because the water reads out to the then it's considered good water for fishing salvation. Obviously, the fertilizer is good, but if you want the wall to get clean, that's not considered good water. We have a word called and we're going to explain the difference is if it's a pre-existing wall from fishing migration, then it's considered a good part of the water. That's like the biggest. But if it's a regular wall from a home, it's just like you I might know that you bring it that the wall get wet. Put it in the on the switch. You look at my picture, is it done? Sorry. If you don't want the wall to get ruined, it's not considered the water, but you want that the wall to get rained on and then cleaned, then it is considered to be done. Now, how does this whole thing have to be cheaper? Rabbi told you that people need to put them out. What if you have an eye, that's the wall? Is it considered October or not October? Certainly not. By the global special services, I know that the initial Rossi, but everybody is supposed to you know what? I hit my head now, so I'm going to say sometimes it's not a good thing. I don't have a good filter. Naturally, I lack my filtration system, not the best. But this one is not bad. My official told me that he gave us a massage. Now, massages are very fun. It's not bad. It's not sounding bad. It's kind of massage. My wife told me it's the best massage they ever got. I need to listen to that. He gave it up 6 months a year. And then the guy gave it to me. He gave this up because he didn't want it to go to work. He gave them back. The guy came over to me for a year. He said, what do you think? Massage or your teeth? I said, massage. Oh, you said massage. He started hugging me. You thought I was going to down low, cheer. No, it's not. For him, it's no massage. You even have to suffer. Why? Because at the end of the day, once in a lifetime opportunity. You gotta say, go back to cheerleading, hopefully. And you don't want to hurt people. You're going to regret it going back. No. But that's being a good student. You learn how to, and that's another thing about this trip. That's the big point of the trip. When we're able to enjoy life and do the schmuck things and then go with TV and camera riding, and then some of us even put that in planes. Once you realize it, then well, that was, they couldn't combine the two. We were putting the everything either in diamonds and word sorry, right? Don't have a good time. Try to steer them. And have the sounds and all that stuff. Okay. So what's the question? The question is, if you take a knife, you take something, you plant it into a wall, what's not enough when we got the street though? Because you consider the full burn is low, because we're going to college and it is good. Which the sun's not. Right? So you're going to have to do some cool things. I don't know what you want. What's the goal for yeah, but it's called. There's a stone coming out of the wall. That's a good one, right? Because everybody can tell that the wall, my soul calls towards this here. I guess in the yard with the roof. Everybody can tell this is man-made. That's not you all have the same rooms. I have 2 bedrooms. Why? There's no question that maybe okay, I'm not going to go there. They saw how much time I spent with their wife. Preparing shit. They figured, okay, we're not going to ask questions. We'll give 2 rooms. Okay. Maybe I'll stick a kid out of my sleeve. I don't know what I'm thinking. It's the same room, Rabbi. It's the same room. Okay, the living room is a little large. That's it. The kid is coming out here. What is that? They're live. I saw you playing the thing.
rough quality of which you can note
Okay, listen.
She was
When you guys get to massage next time in the morning, and you go for steering on the beach over here, what's that? So remember, other domestic steering is room for training. Okay? How many rooms? I need more rooms in here. I need more rooms. I need to prepare a little for one room. I'm going to take the other room. You guys enjoy your spots, okay?
It was a
I didn't know what it looked like. I didn't go in. I didn't look at Listen, if I was gonna, I'll just tell you this. Don't feel bad for me. You know, 3 days, I want to give you that. I would have gone to that spot. Don't get me wrong. Not the same street. I don't just spot. If there's a basketball court there, I'll see how to catch it. I'll go jet ski. I'll go ski. Skydiving, all this outdoor stuff. Sit around. Roman style. Olha isso aí na cabeça. Olha você viu? Everybody? What? You all do it.
Over 100 years later, is revelatory in and of itself.
Alright, so you're not going to show you. Listen, what happened in that restaurant on the 4th floor stays there. It's very kind of fun off by maybe love the shop up on because it's cool. Someone has to remind me when the best friends ever. It's like 2 serial killers walking on the street like, why are you alive? Why are you here? I want to kill you. You mouse. You're ruining it for me. Oh, that was so good. Yeah? Okay, fine. Also, this case of blood signs, again, we got to show you again so we can go back over there. There's nothing shit coming up, but if anybody wants to not go to the spot after this, wants to figure out another share, I'll let you sit. So it says tomorrow, we have a problem here. Even though this wall is not considered a building, you call this man-made. Why is it a problem? Why is the street a problem? 6 people near the wall. Even though you attach the stone, you're the one that does it. So it was not the Peru's colors. Then the river is possible. So here's a great guy with a big knife. But on the wall, it's possible. No, it's some it's talking about something live. Remember, this is Rothschild religious. It's not man-made. And therefore, that's why it's called. And I think I'm going to coming from the tunnel and the airline coming up because they're both from the same sentence. It's the tunnel. And it says, the Mara is the way of the boat. Obviously, it came from a shed and stuff in the ground. So it's this thing doesn't look so good in this picture. Yes, it's a piece. This looks like someone put it there. No, the point is it's a cave, and then that's how it is. No, it's not even places. There's another one too. You're thinking of putting a wall. We shop up, me and anyway, why? It says, you take a knife, you chop the goat like that. Let's look at the next video. We shop the because of share. So what do you see? That even though you use pumpkin, you made it before it's possible. So you want to talk a little bit about the law. You start thinking the law is about the law. A knife is different. Why? Because what? Right, you're not going to fight with a knife to the wall. You know, one day, come and take it out. We don't pull the attack, that's because of share. Now this, as you remember, we had contradictions, we said, it's referring to that those functions of the cover. So here's a great sense of functions of the cover, but the skin is possible. Right, little person of a car, maybe the shot over there, this is a line full of cars, that's the law is about the law. Maybe we can't be right because it's just a shot of what's going on over there. What is it mean? It means a knife, and that when you understand the knife, it's not something that you have to want to do for. Now, some of the things about for a second, I would ask you, what's a worse people? If the knife is over here, here's the knife. Putting the animal on top of the knife and cutting like this, or putting the animal below the knife and cutting like this. This is the knife. We're cutting it, and this is the animal. What's worse people? Putting the animal's neck like this, or putting the animal's neck like this? No? Anybody want to take a guess? Why? Correct. What do you think? Yeah, because right. I hear what yours is asking, but the answer is that if you were to let go, it would be Teresa right there. Because the animal's head, how much does the animal's head weigh? I don't even know if we can lift it. It's probably a couple hundred pounds. That head. So you're holding it back from coming down. So as it's coming down on the knife, that itself is Teresa. The gravity is creating Teresa. I get it, but that's you are in control of the knife. When the neck of the animal's on the bottom, you're controlling the knife. You're doing the knife, you're not doing Teresa. Over here, the neck is pushing back. Right. Now you can see. Teresa is problem when you don't even see. You don't even notice that you're letting the pressure of gravity go onto the knife and you're not controlling. Oh my God, second the person. If you put a knife in the wall, you're stuck up, you got the share. It's a good speaker. This is the only way it's possible. So what is it? Moving the neck back and forth. How do you speak though? You must move the neck back and forth. Sacking the macho, it's out of the aim on the mama, but if he does this, I see some videos. Maybe push down on the knife. That's what I'm telling you. It's like a macho, it's like a macho, it's like a macho, it's like a macho. You learn. You go to the thumbs up yesterday. All right, this. It's two different hello. Sacking a macho, sacking a macho. If the knife is on the bottom and the animal's neck is on the top, and the knife is in his head. Sacking a macho, sacking a macho is moving. But if the knife is on top and the animal's neck is on the bottom, even if it's important, no. These are all posters. The only way it's posted when the knife is below the neck, it's coming down, is only if it's in his hand. That's how we check today. I was today. That. Also, coming down, but the knife is coming down. The leg is coming down. And that's not Teresa. He's controlling it. But over here, you have to count heads. So you're not. The knife is not moving. Yeah, let's see this. What is he doing? Nothing. He's holding up his house head, and he's coming from below. Okay. That's the only time that's okay when he's holding the knife in his hand. But if the knife is stationary, in a wall, that'll be a problem. But if it's a reverse, if the knife is on the top, it doesn't matter if the knife is in the wall, then it's okay. When Caesar's great nephew arrived to Egypt, his troops were dying of hunger, but made it by a separate contingent that had come east from the uneffectually Antony's troops outside Alexandria in July 13 BC. Following this, Antony took his own life by stabbing himself in the mistaken belief that Cleopatra was already dead. Plutarch, whose life of Antony is one of the best sources for these events, presents a complete story where Antony did not die and was brought before Cleopatra, who was alive. He captured by Octavian's troops and finally demanded that he would not be paraded as a defeated prisoner as part of Octavian's triumph. There are 5 days that you have a broken piece of wheat, so the best picture you come up with, actually we have a better one. This, again, not to mention that I don't know if you have to mention sugar cane and ginger and lemon. I took from this picture, now if you look, over on the right side, it's a broken piece of sugar. That's very, very fast for a walk. 5 days. Insert the way you can't just do this. Why? Is it he did a one where he did something like this. That splintery, you never know. And if it's a boss, do not use it as a knife and make it like a steak. Very happy knife, do not use it as a toothpick. They would have to use it as toilet paper. Insert the I know because of them, things are going to be moved to finance. And of course, you use a reed. However, let me see what it is. If you don't like reed, they don't have splinters. Special type of reed. But a reed that has splinters, you know how to use for reed. They don't have to look. I'll show you how to use it for reed. If I'm kind of a carry dog, he said you can use it for the inner of the Zeke. I want to show you right there. So, look at that. Zeke. What does that stand about the reed? Clear. And that's Ziggy. Ziggy means clear. Ziggy, why? It's transparent. It's transparent, you can see right through it. You can see if it has splinters. Rather than little on how to go and rather little chicken, why they're after because it's soft, so it's not going to splinter into the you're not using this for your so you want to take a blast, you know, not, you can have the double solution. If you use toilet paper that catch fire, peanut butter, you can have what you call heroes do that. So in other words, it's more of a holistic thing, I believe. Why? How do I know that? Because with this stop, with this starting, the voice of the starting is not listening to it. Starting now in this toilet paper, right? Why? Because dirt and the problem. Once the sludge is on top of it, anything that catches fire, you can't use this toilet paper, so I'm sorry. Sorry, no more. But, and this is where I get in trouble. I haven't mentioned this in a long time, and it's usually not because of how to talk about this kind of thing, but I feel I need to do a total service analysis. Something called of the day. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. I'll tell you why. It's not a lot. I'm saying I'm not kidding. If a person doesn't use toilet paper correctly, you have a big towel in the shower. You learn in a little bit. Now, something cheap as you should know this. It's one time for $45. It's a little hole that is sprayed. It is noisy. I should be saying this, but I haven't said it all. I'm taking one for the kid. They want to, everybody should have one in their house. And you save a lot of money. What? Everybody will. It's the best thing ever. The best invention ever. And you guys will cool out. I'm serious. You see law, cut your and you save money. I'm not talking about it's not a anyway, and by the way, if anybody wants, they can come to my room. These portable ones, whenever you go, what? No, uniform ones that have the heaters and the giant fans. $25. What? I think like $5. And then you said like for centuries to come, the scientific and intellectual hub of the Great East. If one wanted to learn about athletics, that's Homer a pump no. What I was telling you is if you have, let's say, a scar from a monkey, not go like this with a reed that has splinters before you go with your I was like, it says in the Mishnah, حاجة مشكلة 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 هنا الفرق وعلى ذلك مثلا ما كان والويندو أنا مش هو دول مش هو سعيد فيها كان سوى كده جروب عشان يقول لك أنا جاي في بحث has become one of the most iconic female figures from the ancient world. No, I see it. I see them again. Okay. No one is going to find out. Much of it has to do with her relationships with Caesar and Rabbi, the role she played in the event
she led to the end of the road
Oh, it's one of the.
and the birth of the Roman Empire.
Okay, so check it out. Rejoin, led by cultural outdoor Boston title.
Interest
So there's the straw, the book says the lot of eat meat.
featured in some
Why?
of the most
La kilo and lamb of title. A lot of people here that they love meat more than love meat. Number one, obviously. But some like steak more. So imagine if you couldn't eat any steak, no spots, no
extensive information available
some people that 3-4 days before Sabbath smoking ready up the meat. And here we have the Rabbi of Philip and you go out there and so things like that. And you're just seeing that it's right with part of the smoking everything. Oh, that guy, yeah, who's coming in for a seal. His first seal going. All right. One was done. So believe that some believe in the beginning it was awesome fucking. This is one of the areas of our for to be that just tell look on the same time. Then okay, go ahead and eat. God, shit, dog, we'll want to go to somewhere. Definitely got through the sewage. I have a Halloween they know they didn't need any more water. You want to go. Cachanino, that's what it is. Masculine or abusive, I love something low, something low. The point is that they're allowed to eat it. That should be the point. Not that you can check. The point is that you're allowed to eat it. Oh, you declare my time. It's what the hell? Let's think about life. Why was meat lost in the house? When we were not religious. Why? We were very close to the Mishkan. So we create carton, and every time we want to eat, we create carton, we eat the steak. So we say that was why did meat come with it? I'm not forgetting Mishkan. Like right now, in Charles, it's like we're not a Mishkan. So the only way to eat it is to do what's going to happen? People have said that. So then now that we're far away, very far, we don't have this at all. The Mela, one side, what else? Okay, I guess we really have the one side, the spot open at the one side. Have a wonderful
She first took Julius Caesar as her lover, and then Marquette, and had children with both men. There was an element of double to some of this. Cleopatra might have been calculated in her actions, but it was entirely beyond her control that after his defeat at Rothschild in 48 BC, Pompey the Great would choose to flee to Egypt. If he had gone elsewhere and Caesar had not ended up in Cleopatra's homeland in pursuit of his rival, history could have been very different. Once she caught his eye and began a relationship with him, her ambitions increased. It is very possible that she imagined that if Caesar lived on her earth, he might have tried to assassinate someday. When he was assassinated, her plans would be turned. There is every possibility that her relationship with him was based on genuine affection. Yet there is no doubting that she also benefited from it politically. The donations of Alexander of 34 BC and the lavish titles bestowed on her children point towards the extent of her ambitions. However, ultimately, she had faced a figure that to a significant degree was actually enshrouded by Caesar himself. After biding his time, he convinced the Syrian to wage war on Cleopatra, BC, and defeating them in Sweden. It seems likely that Cleopatra, faced with the possibility of being held as a prisoner to Rome after Antony's death, decided to take her and life. What do you think of Cleopatra? Was it possible that she genuinely formed relationships with Julius Caesar? Did she simply seduce Julius? She knew that Christ as a Cleopatra was a chosen of Egypt and to create genuine engagement in the face of being continuously expelled from the state. These were great sacrifices. looking very much foraging.
Not or something special. That was special. We got to the hotel here at 1:30 in the morning. Then I went to sleep at 2:33. There's some challenge, and obviously you're eating some chunk at 2:30 in the morning. Behind me, by the way, this is the ocean. You can't really see. This is water right over here, and there's some sort of like a lake with ducks right over here. It's hard to see the camera. We wanted a nicer background. That's what we have. We're outdoors right now. A reminder to say Spirit Sahaimer. This is one of my favorite pictures. I'll tell you why. Because for me, I thought I was outside. Everybody was basically sleeping early in the morning, and a couple decided to go see the sunrise. And they took a picture of me, the here. I was still like taxiing from pajamas or something. I don't know. I'm like wearing like a shirt, like one of those basketball shirts. Which I usually don't walk outside with, but nobody's up. And the camels in the background, and the Sahara Desert in the background, and it captures a lot for me. So it's my favorite picture so far for me. This is the Curlin with the Curlin that with us. My son sent us in a while ago. There's a robot, MDY robot. We should go for that. MDY Montreal in English. We have in Hebrew in Montreal. Now the slip allocation in English. Also, yes, bakery. Check this out. It's a beautiful bakery. Look at this. What? Barber, Zipper, Barber. And Great Neck, New York Seal. Unbelievable. Great Neck, New York. Look, nice product. The series of nightmares will force out more visually the wisdom of the supply. There's a few people missing here. I have to say, it's early in the morning here, and Dino makes it extremely late. It's probably about whoever's here. It's early. Serious name anonymous in honor of Rabbi Frankel Yona and Mayor Shemuli Sam Cohen and Joe Ashby, Deal New Jersey, the Shirkoah. Unisefka by Zev Enyal, Shulof, Perek, the Benedict family, Dr. Spov, Yossi, Rachel, Liva, Willig, the Zekanish Mas, Ziva Shulamis, Mas Purpose, Mary Krieger, 29th of PR, she sponsored Unisefka, David Solomon, dedicated memory of Avi Marie, small book, of very kind of sleep, those who are rough. The Alchi County Foundation, the Radcliffe Consortium, and the Alliance, all they do to support of the Y, Anonymous and Stuff, and Rubin, School Guys, with the Chief, Benny. Anonymous. So this year's Shida myself must be the Lalu Salika story. For me, that was a Yad Hashem, a MDY Hashgacha Party story, that we planned the trip to go see Lalu Salika. That's the number one place that everybody tells us that we have to go.
It is 323 BC. Alexander the Great, who has, over the last decade, carved out one of the largest empires in human history, is dead, with no mature heir. Wars soon erupt as Alexander's commanders and relatives fight over his crumbling empire. One of those commanders, however, does not see an end, but a beginning, and after being made governor of Egypt, eventually proclaims himself pharaoh, founding a Hellenic dynasty that will rule Egypt for 300 years, ending with the life and reign of Queen Cleopatra. The man's name, Ptolemy I, the first pharaoh of Ptolemaic Egypt.
Years ago this week, Bernie the Burn, anybody remembers 7 years ago, 7.5, 8 years ago, and he brought somebody in here, more than one.
The man known to history as King Ptolemy I, Soter of Egypt, was most likely born in 367 BC. We have no clear record of his birth, but an ancient source called Rabbi, traditionally attributed to the 2nd century AD writer Lucian of Samosata, claims that Ptolemy was 84 years old when he died in 283 BC, which would mean that he was born around 367 BC. He was born in the kingdom of Macedon in northern Greece, which was in the process of emerging as the dominant power in the Greek world at the time of his birth. Ptolemy's father was most likely a Macedonian named Lagus, who came from an undistinguished family in the region of Aeodia in western Macedonia. Despite his humble birth, Lagus married Asino, a Macedonian noblewoman who was related to the royal family, the Argead dynasty, which claimed descent from the legendary hero Heracles. There is another theory concerning Ptolemy's parentage, though. The Greek geographer of the 2nd century AD, Pausanias, writing in his famous Description of Greece, a travelogue of the Greek world of the Eastern Mediterranean and of its many temples, history and law, refers to a tradition which indicates that Ptolemy's father was not Lagus, but was instead King Philip II, who rose to become ruler of Macedon in 359 BC. According to this tradition, Asino, Ptolemy's mother, was one of Philip's courtesans and was already pregnant by the time she married Lagus with Philip's child. However, the claim that Ptolemy was Philip II's illegitimate son, and therefore Alexander the Great's half-brother, was probably invented by Ptolemy much later in his life, when he was trying to establish his claim to succeed Alexander after the latter's premature death. Had Ptolemy really been Alexander's half-brother, the latter would almost certainly have considered him a dynastic rival and a threat to his position. Alexander might well have had him murdered, rather than promoting him to become one of Macedon's most powerful generals, as we will see he did. Instead, Ptolemy became one of Alexander's friends and advisors. Ptolemy is known to have had a brother named Menelaus, who served as a general in Cyprus and later as a priest to the cult of Alexander in Alexandria. But no other siblings are mentioned in the historical records. At the time of Ptolemy's birth, the kingdom of Macedon was emerging as one of the major powers of the Greek world. The ruling Argead dynasty had held dominion over large parts of what is now northern Greece and North Macedonia, going back to the early 7th century BC. The Macedonians were viewed as a rustic, semi-barbarous people by the more civilized Greeks of the city-states of the Aegean Sea and the Peloponnese. They fought differently too, often relying on cavalry divisions in their wars, unlike the infantry hoplite soldiers of the Greek polis. But eventually, the culture of city-states like Athens, Sparta, Thebes and Corinth diffused north, and the Macedonians became more entrenched in Greek culture and society. What was more, the rich Greek city-states to the south of Macedon were now ripe for conquest. In 404 BC, Sparta had finally triumphed over Athens in the Peloponnesian War, a power struggle for hegemony over the Greek world that lasted 27 years and exhausted all sides. Spartan dominance over the Greek city-states came to an end in 371 BC, when their armies were defeated by the Boeotian League, led by Thebes at the Battle of Leuctra. When King Philip II became ruler of Macedon in 359 BC, he was determined to establish Macedon as the new great power of the Greek world. He built a fearsome war machine by establishing a professional army and adopting new tactics. He developed the formidable Macedonian phalanx, consisting of rows of men armed with a shield and a long spear, known as the Sarissa, giving them a range advantage in close quarters combat. Philip also established the elite companion cavalry, a unit made up of high-ranking nobles and close friends of the king, which often proved the decisive factor on the battlefield. After establishing his authority over the tribes of the southern Balkans, such as the Thracians, through military aggression and diplomacy, Philip turned his attentions southwards, and in a series of wars such as the Olympian War and the Fourth Sacred War, replaced Thebes and the Boeotian League as the dominant power in central Greece and the Peloponnese. This was the political and military backdrop against which Ptolemy grew up. Like other Macedonian boys, he would have learned how to ride and hunt. He would also have learned to read and write in Greek. It is probable that in 353 BC, when he was 14 years old, Ptolemy was sent to become a royal page at King Philip II's court at Pella, the capital of the kingdom of Macedon. It was certainly not as cultivated a place as Athens or Corinth. The Macedonians were known for their heavy drinking and tough upbringing, and many of their customs and traditions appalled the rest of the Greek world, particularly that of polygamy, as Macedonian kings married multiple wives to strengthen alliances at home and abroad. Though the Macedonians spoke Greek, they were called barbarians, perhaps because their accent was difficult to understand for Greeks who lived further south. Here, Ptolemy would have continued his training in the military arts, and by the time of his late teens, may have served in the army during Philip's campaigns of conquest, though this is not explicitly stated. Over time, Ptolemy became a close companion of Philip's son, Alexander, who was born in 356 BC, and who would have been only 3 years old when Ptolemy first arrived in Pella. Around 343 BC, Philip hired the famous philosopher Aristotle, the great intellectual successor to Plato, at Athens, to come to Pella and tutor the teenage Alexander. Ptolemy would have been in his mid-20s at this time, and while there is no record of him studying with Aristotle alongside the Macedonian prince, learning and scholarship would be a key part of Ptolemy's legacy as king of Egypt. Aristotle's arrival to Pella also points towards the manner in which Macedon was becoming the center of a more cosmopolitan kingdom at this time. It is worth briefly pausing here to assess exactly how we know anything at all about Ptolemy and where the gaps in our knowledge lie. The foremost primary source for the first half of his life, down to the time of the death of Alexander the Great, when Ptolemy was in his early to mid-40s, is the Anabasis of Alexander, a lengthy account of the conquest of the Persian Empire by Alexander the Great and his campaign into Central Asia and India, written by Ariana Nicomedia, a Greek historian of the 2nd century AD. Anabasis is an ancient Greek name for a lengthy campaign or expedition. Ptolemy necessarily features in the work. In fact, Ariane used Ptolemy's writings as some of his own source material. In his later life, Ptolemy became a historian himself, though unfortunately, virtually everything he wrote has been lost, with only fragments of his texts surviving second-hand in the writings of later scholars like Ariane, a contemporary of Ariane in the Eastern Mediterranean. The historical biographer Plutarch wrote A Life of Demetrius, one of Ptolemy's rivals for power in the decades following the death of Alexander and the fragmentation of his empire. Ptolemy appears regularly in this biography of Demetrius. Closer to Ptolemy's own time, Polybius and Diodorus Siculus, two Greek historians of the 2nd and 1st centuries BC respectively, both composed universal histories of the world, in which the conquests of Alexander and the wars fought by the rulers of the Hellenistic kingdoms, which followed therefm, are discussed. Again, Ptolemy and his family are discussed therein. Numerous other ancient texts shed light on his reign in Egypt and events there. some almost incidentally so. For instance, the 2nd century BC letter of Aristeas to Philocrates provides one of the most informative accounts of how Alexandria, the capital of Ptolemy's kingdom in Egypt, emerged as a great center of learning in the 3rd century BC. Finally, as with any ruler who reigned for the better part of 40 years in ancient times, there are many inscriptions on temples and civic buildings and other archaeological sources which can shed light on Ptolemy's reign. Still, it is a great pity that Ptolemy's own histories, like so many other works from the ancient world, have not survived. Back in the middle of the 4th century BC, when he was a young man, Ptolemy began his ascent through the ranks of the Macedonian army. In 339 BC, in response to a demonstration of Athenian and Theban resistance against Macedon's growing influence over the Greek city-states, King Philip marched on southern Greece. In the summer of 338 BC, the Macedonians faced a Greek coalition force at Chaeronea near Thebes. The 18-year-old Alexander commanded the left wing of the Macedonian army. Ptolemy may have been one of the officers at his side. During the battle, Alexander led the breakthrough against the Sacred Band, a 300-man elite Theban infantry unit. The following year, Philip summoned the Greek states to Corinth and forced them to swear oaths to each other and him, establishing himself as the hegemon of the Greek world. Ptolemy was around 30 years old by then and was a trusted courtier to both Philip and Alexander. However, in 337 BC, he temporarily lost his court position. At that time, Alexander planned to marry the daughter of Pixodorus, the satrap or governor of Caria, in what is now southwestern Turkey. Ptolemy was among 5 of Alexander's advisors who supported the offer against the king's wishes. The furious King Philip responded by banishing those involved from Pella. It is unclear when Ptolemy and his comrades went, but they may have been back in the capital by the time Philip was assassinated by one of his bodyguards in October 336 BC. The circumstances of Philip's death were murky, and it may have been the result of a palace coup. Following his father's untimely death, 20-year-old Alexander became King Alexander III of Macedon. His military exploits would soon earn him the epitaph Alexander the Great. The young king almost immediately faced a revolt from the southern Greeks, but he quickly defeated these opponents and re-established the League of Corinth. In 335 BC, while consolidating his power at home by purging potential rivals, Alexander led campaigns against the Triballi and the Illyrians to the north and west of Macedonia. Ptolemy is likely to have accompanied Alexander during these campaigns, since he described them in his histories and portions thereof ended up in Arrian's analysis. While Alexander was fighting the Illyrians, he received news that Thebes had once again revolted. He thus marched south with a force of 30,000 infantry and 3,000 cavalry, according to Ptolemy's account, again transmitted via Arrian. The Macedonians took the city with heavy casualties after the general Perdiccas, who commanded the vanguard, attacked without awaiting orders from Alexander. Diodorus Siculus does not mention Perdiccas launching his attack prematurely in his account, and it is likely that Ptolemy was seeking to denigrate Perdiccas, who was later one of his major rivals in the bloody civil wars that ensued following the death of Alexander. After capturing Thebes, Alexander brutally ordered the city to be razed to the ground. It would not be rebuilt for another 2 decades. Alexander then turned his attention towards the invasion of Asia, which his father, Philip, had been planning before he was assassinated. After leaving Greece in the hands of a loyal veteran general named Antipater, in the spring of 334 BC, Alexander led an army of at least 35,000 and cavalry sailed across the Bosphorus to Asia. He then united his forces with 10,000 men under the Macedonian general Parmenion, who had been in Asia Minor since 336 BC, preparing the Macedonian forces there for the coming campaign. Ptolemy served with the infantry in Alexander's army, but his precise rank and role is unclear. Alexander, Ptolemy, and the Macedonian king's other close companions were now setting off to conquer the Persian Empire. Asia Minor, the ancient name for what we know as Turkey today, had been ruled since the middle of the 6th century BC by the Persian or Achaemenid Empire, a vast realm ruled by the Persians. The group who had emerged out of Iran or Persia in the 550s BC rapidly conquered most of the known world. Their empire extended across the modern-day nations and regions of Iran, Iraq, Turkey, the Levant, Egypt, parts of northern Arabia, the Caucasus, and even into parts of Central Asia in Afghanistan and Pakistan, an area then known as Bactria. The Persians had even tried to conquer mainland Greece, but were famously repulsed during 2 invasion attempts in the early 5th century BC. Now, after 2 centuries of rivalry between the Greeks and the Persians, Macedon had emerged as a power that had united the Greek city-states, making them a power to rival Persia. Alexander consequently embarked in 334 BC on a campaign, or anabasis, as Arian would call it, to conquer Persia, an idea his father had contemplated before his premature death. This would involve clashes with local satraps or governors, minor kings who ruled the provinces of the Persian Empire on behalf of Darius III, the Persian king of kings, who had just succeeded to the throne far away in the Persian capitals, Susa and Persepolis in southern Iran. After crossing the Bosphorus, Alexander's army was confronted by an army raised by the local Persian satrap Arcetes at the river Granicus. The Macedonian phalanxes easily overwhelmed the lightly armed Persians, and the Macedonians and Greeks won the first major victory of the campaign, but would take Alexander, Ptolemy, and many others to the edge of the known world. Alexander's initial successes alarmed King Darius III, who began to raise a large army in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, to meet the Macedonian threat. As the Persian king marched north to confront Alexander, the 2 sides clashed at Issus in southern Turkey in November 333 BC. While Alexander's army was around 40,000 strong, ancient sources suggest that the Persians had up to 500,000 men, though modern estimates hold that the figure was more plausibly closer to 100,000 men. Again, while Ptolemy left a detailed description of the ensuing battle and would have been a participant, there is no information about where he was deployed, or whether he had any men under his command. Knowing he could not engage the enemy in a conventional pitched battle, Alexander led his cavalry straight to Darius's position behind the Persian center. Although the Macedonian infantry came under heavy pressure from the Persians, Alexander did not allow himself to be distracted from his objective and continued his charge towards Darius. As the Macedonian cavalrymen cut their way through his bodyguard, Darius panicked and fled from the field. As Alexander had anticipated, the sight of their king fleeing caused the Persians to lose heart. With the Persian infantry and cavalry retreating in disorder, The Macedonians advanced and slaughtered many fleeing enemies. Although Darius had escaped, Alexander managed to capture a substantial number of the royal entourage, including Darius's mother, wife, and 2 daughters. Alexander demonstrated his magnanimity towards his royal captives and promised to protect them in Darius's absence. After marching south into Syria, Alexander's next target was to neutralize the Persian fleet anchored at the port city of Tyre. The city was located on an island around half a mile offshore, a natural defensive point. In order to besiege it, Alexander ordered the construction of a causeway to enable his men to attack from land. The Tyrians managed to hold out for 6 months until the summer of 332 BC, but Alexander eventually captured the city by attacking on both land and sea. Alexander continued down the Mediterranean coast and captured Gaza after a brutal 2-month siege. His next target was Egypt, then a province of the Persian Empire governed by the satrap Mazaches. Although the Persians had ruled Egypt for almost 2 centuries, Persian rule remained unpopular, and Mazaches knew he could not resist, and duly surrendered to Alexander at the ancient capital of Memphis, to the south of present-day Cairo. Alexander was careful not to make Mazaches' mistake, and treated Egyptian customs and religion with respect. Alexander gained popularity by restoring old Egyptian temples, and although he was not formally crowned pharaoh, he made sacrifices to Egyptian gods and assumed the titles and responsibilities associated with kingship in Egypt. Alexander was determined to make a visit to the Oracle of Amun-Ra in the Siwa oasis, situated hundreds of miles to the west, near the border between modern-day Libya and Egypt. As Amun-Ra was the creator god of the Egyptian pantheon, the Greeks associated him with Zeus, their most important deity, and called him Zeus Ammon. Ptolemy was among the group of companions whom Alexander chose to accompany him on his journey from Memphis to the Siwa oasis. The party took a circuitous route via the Nile Delta and the northern coast of Egypt, where the king founded a city named Alexandria. After marching west to the vicinity of what is now El Alamein, they turned south and made for the oracle. After consulting the priest, Alexander announced to his companions that he was the son of Zeus Ammon. All of this was Ptolemy's first experience of the land he and his family would come to rule for a period of nearly 3 centuries. While Alexander was in Egypt, the king of Persia had raised another large army to confront the Macedonian conqueror. When the 2 armies met at the Battle of Gaugamela in what is now northern Iraq on the 1st of October 331 BC, Alexander was once again heavily outnumbered and employed similar tactics as at Issus. On this occasion, he ordered his right flank to fall back, enticing the Persian cavalry commander Bessus to launch a premature attack. Bessus left a small gap in the Persian line, which Alexander immediately exploited, leading his cavalry towards Darius. As the Persian king turned to flee once again, Alexander and his horsemen set off in pursuit, but soon returned to the battlefield at Gaugamela to relieve Parmenion on the Macedonian left, who had been struggling to hold back the numerically superior Persian infantry commanded by Mazaeus, satrap of Babylon. By the time Alexander returned, the crisis was over as Mazaeus' men realized their king had abandoned them once again, giving Parmenion the opportunity to counterattack. Following his victory at Gaugamela, Alexander marched south to occupy Babylon, where he decided to maintain the satrapy system and confirmed Mazaeus in his office. He then proceeded southeast towards the Persian heartland of Persis, taking possession of the royal capital of Susa in December. Alexander's next target was the city of Persepolis. As Darius attempted to raise a third army, Ariobarzanes, satrap of Persis, defended a pass over the Zagros Mountains, known as the Persian Gates. Confined to a narrow defile, Alexander's men were cut down by the defending Persians. Alexander's progress was stalled for a month until a local shepherd informed him of a mountain path that would enable him to circumvent Ariobarzanes' position. Ptolemy claimed that Alexander gave him command of 3,000 men to attack the enemy in the center of the pass, while the king marched his men behind Ariobarzanes. However, Arian suggests that Ptolemy was deployed further in the rear and in trust to prevent any Persians from escaping. In late January 330 BC, Alexander's army arrived in Persepolis. Alexander ordered the destruction of palace buildings associated with Xerxes the Great, the Persian king, who had invaded Greece a century and a half earlier, during which the city of Athens had been sacked. According to one account, the destruction of Persepolis was encouraged by an Athenian woman in the Macedonian entourage named Thais, who would later become one of Ptolemy's wives. After 3 months in Persepolis, Alexander continued the chase for Darius, who was now seeking to raise a new army in Central Asia. Darius's string of military failures encouraged a rebellion by his commander Bessus, who had the King of Kings killed before proclaiming himself as king after Xerxes V. Cautious of irritating local sentiment, when he arrived in Central Asia, Alexander ordered Darius's body to be buried in Persepolis with full ceremonial honors. As Alexander prepared to take on Bessus, he was himself the target of an assassination plot instigated by a friend named Dimnus. Although the plot had been known of to Philotas, Parmenian's son and commander of the Campanian cavalry, he did not inform Alexander about it. Once Alexander learned both of the plot and Philotas's knowledge of it, he eliminated the conspirators and executed both Philotas and Parmenion for treason. Alexander's primary motivation for eliminating the pair was probably because they had criticized the king for his growing adherence to Persian customs over Greek ones. Alexander responded by promoting trusted friends to senior positions. His closest companion, Hephaestion, became one of the commanders of the Campanian cavalry, while Ptolemy obtained a more senior position. By now, in his mid-30s, Ptolemy had played a role in the commanding of the Macedonian forces throughout the campaign to conquer the Persian Empire. However, it is difficult to be sure exactly how senior his position was during these years. The sources we have available focus, for obvious reasons, on Alexander, even where they are derived from Ptolemy's histories. Furthermore, even where they do Ptolemy, it's debatable how much we can trust them. Ptolemy would have been keen in later years to stress his own seniority amongst the companions of Alexander, and any source like Arian that relied on his own writings might have fallen prey to believing Ptolemy's own exaggerations. These issues aside, it does seem relatively clear that Alexander's elimination of Parmenion and Philotas enabled Ptolemy to rise to a more prominent position within the Macedonian leadership in 330 BC. In the months that followed, Alexander's army braced the difficult conditions to cross the Hindu Kush in the winter of 330 BC and 329 BC, forcing Bessus to retreat to Sogdiana in what is now Uzbekistan. After taking the city of Balkh, Alexander prepared to cross the Oxus River, now known as the Amudarya, into Sogdiana. Although Bessus managed to destroy the boats on the river to prevent Alexander from making his crossing, the latter issued a message to the remaining Persian armies, offering friendship with anyone who could bring Bessus to him as a captive. Two Sogdian chieftains named Spithemenes and Tataphenes duly informed Alexander they had arrested Bessus. The king gave Ptolemy his first independent command by sending him at the head of some 5,000 men to take Bessus into custody. Ptolemy delivered the Persian usurper to Alexander, who sent him to Balkh, where he had his nose and ears cut off before being executed the following year. Despite surrendering Bessus, Spithemenes and Tataphenes soon turned against Alexander and began waging a guerrilla war in the mountains of Central Asia. Alexander responded with a brutal pacification campaign, in the course of which he appointed Ptolemy as commander of one of the detachments which worked to restore order in the region. In the meantime, Alexander continued to be criticized by his companions for his embrace of Eastern customs and his insistence on remaining in Asia. Many of his followers wanted to return home. They had marched east to conquer the Persian Empire, but now, having done so, their king seemed to be intent on wandering even further east, to lands few Greeks or Macedonians had ever heard of, never visited. The growing resentment boiled over in the summer of 328 BC, when Alexander's old friend Clitus, who had saved his life at the Battle of the Granicus River, launched into a drunken rant targeted at Alexander and the companions like Ptolemy, who sycophantically praised his exploits. As the furious Alexander rushed into Clitus, Ptolemy intervened and dragged the latter out of the room. But as the king continued to shout his curses, Clitus broke away from Ptolemy and ran back to continue the argument with Alexander. The king immediately grabbed a spear from one of his bodyguards and killed Clitus on the spot. As the unrest grew towards Alexander's actions, it is very possible that Ptolemy's stock grew in the king's eyes, as he established himself as an unflinching supporter of Alexander's plans. This would leave Ptolemy in a good position when the time came a few years later for a successor to emerge. The campaign against Tataphenes and Spithemenes was always coming to an end in Central Asia. Alexander's men performed an extraordinary feat in capturing a fortress known as the Sogdian Rock by scaling up a sheer cliff face under the cover of darkness. Ptolemy played an important role in the siege of the equally formidable rock of Joannes, protected by a deep ravine which Alexander sought to bridge. Ptolemy was one of 3 men responsible for the night operations which enabled Alexander to build a wooden bridge and deploy his siege machines. In the spring of 327 BC, Alexander married Roxana, the daughter of a Bactrian nobleman. The decision caused further dissension among some of Alexander's friends, who wanted him to marry a Greek woman. Ptolemy seems to have acted as intelligencer for Alexander during this period, bringing information to the king about potential plots against him. Despite the unrest, Alexander was determined to march further east into India, and in mid-327 BC, he divided his army into 2 columns and marched towards the Indus River. Ptolemy accompanied Alexander as he led his column through the Swamp Valley, where they faced formidable resistance from the Aspasian peoples. During the next phase of the campaign, Ptolemy led Alexander's left flank at the siege of Arrhachium, while Leonatus, another of Alexander's bodyguards, commanded the Macedonian right. In Ptolemy's later account, Alexander and Leonatus swiftly overcame enemy resistance, but he himself faced a tougher challenge before he eventually prevailed. During the final stage of his march towards the Indus Valley, Alexander besieged several fortresses belonging to the Assassine people. During the siege of Massalia, the Macedonians killed the local king and prompted the queen to offer her surrender. Ptolemy played a prominent role in the final siege of the campaign against the mounted top fortress of Aeolus. He was stationed at a summit on the opposite side of the ravine. Alexander bridged it in order to take the position. Alexander quickly moved on towards the Hydaspes River to do battle with Porus, a neighboring Indian prince who resisted Alexander's rule. Ptolemy accompanied Alexander as he led a detachment on a flank attack. The movement was poorly executed, and Alexander found himself facing the entire enemy army. Nevertheless, he won a decisive victory, captured Porus, and made him his vassal. Although Alexander continued to push east, his men were no longer willing to follow him, and he was finally persuaded to turn back. Alexander wanted to reach the Indian Ocean and build a fleet at the Hydaspes, but after the fleet was damaged in a storm, he decided to besiege the city of Mali in the Punjab. Alexander and a handful of senior officers scaled the wall of the enemy citadel, but were soon stranded when the ladders collapsed beneath them. During this engagement, the king was struck by an arrow in his neck and was shielded by an officer named Eugastus, while the rest of the army stormed the gates and massacred the garrison before they could inflict further damage. Arian refers to accounts of Ptolemy being the man responsible for shielding Alexander. It was from this that he allegedly acquired his nickname, Soter, meaning savior. He has become known by this ever since, establishing the name Ptolemy Soter. It also set a precedent whereby members of the Ptolemaic dynasty he founded in Egypt acquired cognomens that were added to their regnal name. The acquisition of the Soter name was one of the last actions of the India campaign. Not long after this, Alexander, Ptolemy, and the other Macedonians turned back westwards for Persia. Back in Persia at Susa, in the early spring of 324 BC, Alexander organized a mass marriage ceremony between his senior officers and companions and numerous Persian noblewomen. The idea here was to mingle the Macedonian and Persian nobility in ways which would create a more homogeneous empire over the coming decades. Alexander himself married two Persian princesses, while Ptolemy married Artakama, the daughter of a Persian nobleman named Artabazus. Ptolemy does not appear to have been very fond of his Persian wife, and may have quickly divorced her after Alexander's death. Matters deteriorated further thereafter. In the summer of 324 BC, after the king had dismissed his veteran army and allowed them to return home as they had hoped, Alexander suffered a personal tragedy with the death of Hephaestion. He responded by indulging in even heavier drinking than he was already used to. Alexander appointed Perdiccas as his new second-in-command and sent him to convey Hephaestion's body to Babylon, where a funeral ceremony was. In early 323 BC, Alexander went to Babylon and prepared to lead a campaign into the Arabian Peninsula. While Alexander had suffered several battle wounds, some of which threatened to kill him, he had otherwise been healthy, but in mid-323 BC, he suddenly fell ill and died in mid-June, a few weeks short of his 33rd birthday. While Alexander had a 4-year-old son named Heracles, born to his Persian mistress Barsine, the young boy's illegitimate birth excluded him from the succession. Alexander's Bactrian wife, Roxana, was several months pregnant, but there was no guarantee that she would give birth to a son who would live. In any event, there was no way that the enormous empire which Alexander had built over the preceding decade could be held together during the long minority rule of a child that was not even born yet. The question of how to reach a political settlement following Alexander's suspicious death would frame the rest of Ptolemy's life. During his illness, Alexander summoned Perdiccas to his side and gave him his signet ring to deputize for him. According to Ptolemy's later account, as Alexander's condition deteriorated, his generals gathered at his bedside and asked who would succeed him, to which the king answered, quote, "To the best." He died shortly thereafter. This prophetic anecdote has been challenged by modern historians, who note that Alexander had an elder half-brother, Arrhidaeus, who could be expected to continue the Argead royal line, although he suffered from some form of mental incapacitation, which meant that he would only be able to execute royal duties with the regency. Due to his position as Alexander's deputy, Perdiccas took charge of affairs and chaired a meeting of Alexander's generals and bodyguards to decide on the succession question. With himself in mind, Perdiccas proposed a regency which would last until Roxana's child, presumed to be a son, came of age. Others put forward their claims to act as regent. Ptolemy spoke against all the proposed candidates and suggested a council of equals who would work together to govern the empire as satraps. These proposals were rejected until one of those gathered spoke in favor of Arrhidaeus, upon which an officer named Maliga brought Arrhidaeus into the meeting and proclaimed him as King Philip III. Eventually, the parties agreed to a compromise in which Arrhidaeus would be king. If Roxana subsequently gave birth to a son, the two would be joint rulers. Perdiccas would remain as second in command, but Maliga would serve as his deputy. Almost immediately, Perdiccas disregarded the arrangement by sidelining King Philip and eliminating Maliga. He then declared himself regent to Philip III and agreed to Ptolemy's proposal to divide the empire into satrapies, which he believed would allow him to isolate his rivals and eliminate them one by one. As part of this arrangement, Ptolemy became satrap of Egypt. Ptolemy had suddenly emerged as the ruler of one of the richest and most cultured parts of Alexander's recently assembled empire. The Nile ensured that Egypt was a fertile land, one which had been the cradle of one of the oldest civilizations on Earth. At the same time, the surrounding desert and the marshes of the Nile Delta made the country easier to defend. Here, Ptolemy would be able to build up his power in the months and years ahead, as his rivals inevitably came to blows elsewhere. Wars were not slow in breaking out. Following Alexander's death, the Greeks almost immediately rose up against Macedonian rule, prompting Antipater and Craterus, two of the other former companions of Alexander, to join forces to defeat the uprising and impose direct rule. Perdiccas was alarmed by the army that Antipater and Craterus had under their command, and prepared to do battle with them. Ptolemy remained in Babylon with Perdiccas for several months, during which time Roxana gave birth to a son named Alexander, who was duly proclaimed as King Alexander IV, alongside his half-uncle Philip III, in accordance with the earlier agreement. Ptolemy probably arrived in Egypt in 322 BC. As ruler of Egypt, Ptolemy followed Alexander's example and promoted the traditional religion of the country. Ptolemy initially governed Egypt from Memphis, but would later relocate to Alexandria, which was still under construction at the start of his reign. To strengthen his position on the Mediterranean coast, he formed an alliance with the people of the island of Cyprus, and also took advantage of a political dispute in Cyrenaica, in what is now Libya, to bring that region under Egyptian control. In the summer of 321 BC, Ptolemy received information that after spending 2 years preparing a fabulous casket and carriage, Perdiccas was preparing to finally transport Alexander's body to Macedonia from Mesopotamia. In September 321 BC, Ptolemy executed an audacious plan to steal the king's remains at Damascus, and justified his action by claiming that Alexander's final wishes were to be buried at the oracle of Zeus Ammon in the Siwa oasis, which the great king had visited while in Egypt back in 331 BC. However, after seizing the body, Ptolemy made no effort to take the late king's body to the oracle, and instead placed it in a temporary tomb in Memphis before transferring it to Alexandria to strengthen his legitimacy. Ptolemy's kidnapping of Alexander's body was an open challenge to Perdiccas' authority as a regent, and he responded by launching an invasion of Egypt in mid-320 BC in the name of the two kings, who were part of his entourage. Although his army began to melt away almost immediately after crossing the Egyptian frontier, Perdiccas made his way towards Memphis and attacked the nearby fort of the Camels, but Ptolemy proved equal to the task and defended the fort from its walls. Perdiccas then marched directly on Memphis, but his men struggled to swim across the Nile, and many drowned in their heavy armor. After, Perdiccas ordered the men to withdraw. Those who had already swum across to the far bank noticed the plight of their drowned comrades and took off their armor to swim back. Many of them were allegedly eaten by crocodiles. With his army in disarray, Perdiccas was soon stabbed to death by two of his subordinates, Seleucus and Bethon. Ptolemy treated Perdiccas' men magnanimously and presented gifts to the joint kings Philip and Alexander, which led Philip III to confirm his status as satrap of Egypt. Ptolemy was offered the regency, but refused and remained in Egypt with Alexander's body, while the two kings departed for Macedonia. Following Perdiccas' death, Alexander's surviving successors met at Paradisus in Syria in 320 BC to work out a new arrangement. Alexander IV was still an infant, and Philip III was not considered capable of ruling in his own right. A new regent was needed. The meeting was chaired by Antipater, a grand old man of around 80 years of age. It was agreed that he would become regent, a temporary solution giving Antipater's age. His ally Antigonus, previously only satrap of Phrygia in northern Asia Minor, inherited Perdiccas' armies in Asia, while Perdiccas' assassin Seleucus was named satrap of Babylon. Ptolemy was confirmed as satrap of Egypt and strengthened his ties to Antipater by marrying his daughter Eurydice in 320 BC. 3 years later, Ptolemy would also marry her niece, Berenice, as he firmly adopted the polygamy that Alexander had promoted. Ptolemy seems to have had at least 4 wives at various times. The following year, the elderly Antipater died. His son, Cassander, would eventually emerge as his successor, as regent in Greece and Macedon, who soon seized Olympias, Alexander the Great's mother, and executed her. He also placed the infant king Alexander IV and Roxana under house arrest, while publicly presenting himself as a protector. Philip III was also killed during these events. Thus, in the early 310s BC, the former companions of Alexander and other figures like Cassander and Seleucus were not really known Macedonian king, but were now emerging as powerful figures in the civil war, dispensed with the pretense that they were trying to govern Alexander's empire as custodians of it until his son came of age to succeed him. They were clearly all trying to acquire their own slice of the empire to rule themselves. The civil wars which began during this time are known as the Wars of the Diadochi. Diadochi meaning successors in ancient Greek. These wars would last for 4 decades, the entirety of the rest of Ptolemy's life. In the years that followed, Antigonus took control of Mesopotamia and Syria and adjoining lands, forcing Seleucus to flee to Ptolemy for protection, warning him that Antigonus planned to become sole ruler of Alexander's empire and was planning an invasion of Egypt. In response, Ptolemy formed an alliance with Cassander and Lysimachus, satrap of Thrace, in 315 BC, and demanded that Seleucus be reinstated in Mesopotamia. It was probably at this time that Ptolemy moved his capital from Memphis to Alexandria, which was more strategically located in northern Egypt, while Antigonus attempted to use diplomatic means to undermine Ptolemy's allies in Cyprus. In 313 BC, an Egyptian fleet led by Seleucus defeated Antigonus's fleet and gained control of the whole island. In late 312 BC, Ptolemy fought a battle against Antigonus's forces near Gaza, during which Ptolemy effectively neutralized the enemy's war elephants by attacking them from below with javelins. Adopting a tactic Alexander had used against Indian war elephants at the Battle of Hydaspes. The victorious Ptolemy captured 8,000 enemy troops and soon retook Gaza. These gains were short-lived, as Antigonus prepared to join forces with his son to take their revenge on Ptolemy. Rather than risk a battle, Ptolemy retreated back to Egypt. By 311 BC, with all the combatants exhausted, Seleucus was able to retake Babylon and declare himself general of Asia in opposition to Antigonus. Following a new round of peace negotiations, Antigonus lost much of his territory. A temporary ceasefire obtained thereafter. As none of the Diadochi wanted to give up lands, there were no complaints when Cassander arranged for Alexander IV and his mother Roxana to be poisoned in 310 BC. With Alexander IV's death, the Argead dynasty, which had ruled Macedonia for over 3 centuries, was extinguished. The Diadochi, like Ptolemy, were now free to give up the pretense that they were merely ruling their territories as satraps that would one day hand over power to Alexander IV when he came of age. With this, we can consider that Ptolemy had emerged fully as King Ptolemy I of Egypt. His regnal name is usually given as King Ptolemy I Sultan, using the cognomen he had acquired years earlier for saving the life of Alexander the Great. Everyone understood that the peace agreement of 311 BC was merely a temporary lull, as all parties prepared for the renewed conflict. Ptolemy was secure in Egypt, and he promoted his cause as Alexander's successor by placing Alexander's remains at the center of his new capital, Alexandria. After its foundation by Alexander in April 331 BC, the city was being built according to the designs of the architect Dinocrates of Rhodes, who connected the new city to the nearby island of Pharos via a causeway. The early building work was primarily focused on defense and trade. After taking Alexander's body to Alexandria, Ptolemy built a mausoleum known as the Sema and set up a religious cult to honor Alexander as a god. This structure was replaced a century later by a new mausoleum built by Ptolemy IV, which was integrated into the palace complex and served as the royal tomb of the whole Ptolemaic dynasty. Ptolemy would also found the city of Ptolemais near Thebes, which served as his capital of southern Upper
After a
Egypt,
long day,
together with Alexandria and the nearby trading port of Naucratis. Ptolemais was one of 3 cities in Egypt which enjoyed the status of a Greek city-state and had its own elected officials, while Alexander the Great had ordered the building of dozens of cities called Alexandria while he was undertaking his campaigns. The Alexandria he founded in northern Egypt would prove to become the most preeminent of these urban centers under the patronage of the Ptolemaic dynasty. While he would build Alexandria into one of the greatest cities of the ancient world, Ptolemy's ambitions extended far beyond Egypt. In 310 BC, after a period of consolidation, during which he solidified his control over Egypt and Cyrenaica and strengthened his armies, he resumed hostilities in the wars of Diadochi. He sent his forces against Antigonus, though with mixed success. The following year, in 309 BC, Ptolemy personally led an army to occupy the western coast of Asia Minor, and the following year, he was challenging Cassander in Greece, seeking not only to bring the League of Corinth under his control, but to conquer his native Macedonia. And around this time, Ptolemy circulated a document he claimed to be Alexander's will, which stipulated that his full sister Cleopatra should marry Ptolemy. Cleopatra accepted the proposal, but was soon put to death by Antigonus before she could do so. It has been speculated that it was only after learning of Cleopatra's demise that Ptolemy came up with the idea of claiming that he was a son of King Philip II of Macedon, and thus a half-brother of the deceased Alexander. Moreover, his decision to launch a campaign against Cassander in Greece and Macedon indicates that he aspired to unite all of Alexander's former empire under his rule. Despite these claims, though, Ptolemy found little support among the Greeks and returned to Egypt, though he remained in partial control of the key city of Corinth and had strengthened his dominance of the eastern Mediterranean. The wars over the next several years centered on the eastern Mediterranean and control over territories like the islands of Rhodes and Cyprus, the latter of which Ptolemy had established control of early on in the wars of the Diadochi. For instance, Antigonus sent his son Demetrius to try and take control of Athens in 307 BC, and then later to attack Cyprus. The latter expedition proved successful, and Ptolemy temporarily lost control of the island. Fresh from his success, in 306 BC, both Antigonus and Demetrius assumed the title of king. The likes of Ptolemy and Cassander had also been de facto kings, and soon followed suit and began circulating coins with their likenesses. Despite his defeat at sea of Cyprus, Ptolemy rallied and set up his camp at Elysium, near present-day Port Said, where he awaited a large invasion force of more than 80,000 men under the joint command of Antigonus and Demetrius. A combination of poor weather and Ptolemy's tactic of encouraging enemy troops to defect by offering them bribes forced Antigonus and Demetrius to turn back. It is possible that it was at this time that Ptolemy began formally using the epithet of Soter that he had acquired years earlier, though it is more likely that Ptolemy began using this name officially in 304 BC, after he helped to defend Rhodes from invasion by Demetrius, following which the thankful Rhodians set up a religious cult in Ptolemy's honor. After his failure to take Rhodes, Demetrius strengthened his Phrygian town of Ipsos, during which Antigonus was killed. Ptolemy, Lysimachus, and Seleucus were by then only three survivors among Alexander's original successors. Still, Seleucus had only ever had a tenuous link to the dead king, proceeded to divide Antigonus's vast domain among themselves. Lysimachus received the western half of Asia Minor. Seleucus took over the remainder of Antigonus's territory, extending all the way to Central Asia. Ptolemy's gains in Syria and the Levant were relatively modest, and his relations with Seleucus were strained by a dispute over possession of Phoenicia, in particular the wealthy cities of Tyre and Sidon. During the ensuing diplomatic reshuffle of the early 290s BC, Ptolemy established marriage ties to Lysimachus, while Seleucus reached out to Demetrius. Not long afterwards, Seleucus and Demetrius unexpectedly sought a reconciliation with Ptolemy. As part of the deal, Demetrius sent his ally King Pyrrhus of Epirus to Alexandria as a hostage for his good behavior. Ptolemy and Demetrius were soon at war again following developments in Greece. Alexander had died in 297 BC. He was succeeded by his eldest son, Philip IV, born a few months before his own death, leaving the kingdom jointly ruled by Cassander's younger sons, Antipater I and Alexander V. Ptolemy responded by restoring Pyrrhus to his throne at Epirus, which he had lost after the Battle of Ipsus, located in what is now southern Albania. Epirus bordered Macedonia to the west, enabling Pyrrhus to intervene on behalf of Macedonia. Demetrius would also become embroiled in these conflicts, eventually emerging as king there in 294 BC. By this time, the interminable wars of the Diadochi were entering their final stage. There was only so long that all the parties involved could maintain large armies for, and new concerns were emerging in the west, where Pyrrhus and Epirus would soon be drawn to defend the Greeks of southern Italy against an emerging power there, the Roman Republic. For his part, Ptolemy took advantage of Demetrius' absence in Macedonia by retaking control of the eastern Mediterranean. He captured Cyprus, which would thereafter remain in Ptolemaic possession until the 1st century BC. Ptolemy also took control of the Cycladic islands and the Aegean Sea, avoiding by establishing their own Ptolemy's Soter. At around the same time, he seized the rich trading cities of Sidon and Tyre in the Levant, as well as parts of Asia Minor that remained loyal to Demetrius. After a couple of years of relative peace, Demetrius built up an army of some 100,000 men to invade Asia and was ready to strike by 288 BC. In response, Ptolemy invaded Greece, while Lysimachus and Pyrrhus launched a two-pronged attack on Macedonia from east and west, and divided the kingdom between each other. Although Demetrius took control of the Peloponnese and laid siege to Athens in 287 BC, Ptolemy and Pyrrhus supported the Athenians and expelled Demetrius from Greece. Demetrius crossed into Asia Minor and seized a few towns, but was eventually defeated in battle in 285 BC. He sought refuge with Seleucus, but was imprisoned by him and died in captivity in 283 BC. Thus, the wars of the Diadochi came to an end in the late 280s BC, with Ptolemy having carved out a position as king of Egypt, who also controlled Cyrenaica in Libya, the island of Cyprus, the Sinai Peninsula, large parts of the Levant, and some of the other islands of the Aegean Sea. The other two great successor states were the dominion of Seleucus, which became known as the Seleucid Empire and covered Syria, Mesopotamia, Persia, and Asia Minor, while the kingdom of Macedon would survive as the weaker of each of the states.
Many parts of Alexander's former empire became independent again, notably the kingdoms of Central Asia and the Greek city-states of the mainland. By the time the wars of the Diadochi were winding down, Ptolemy was around 80 years old and in declining health. He had spent much of his career following Alexander's death in conflict with his rivals, interspersed with very brief periods of peace and tranquility, lasting no more than a couple of years at a time. Nevertheless, while the ancient sources offer little information as to how Ptolemy approached state administration, the kingdom enjoyed stability and prosperity during his rule. Ptolemy was careful to balance the interests of the Macedonian and the native Egyptian populations. While he moved his capital to Alexandria and founded Ptolemais to extend his influence further up the Nile Valley, he recognized that he had to respect Egyptian traditions and made sacrifices to the Egyptian gods. He developed the cult of the god Serapis as a dual Greco-Egyptian deity in particular. This was symptomatic of his entire method of ruling. Ptolemy established a dual Hellenistic kingdom where Greeks and Macedons intermingled with Egyptians. The Greeks were quite clearly the ruling elite, because the arts and architecture of the Ptolemaic era makes clear they adapted to local conditions. As a result, we find many friezes on temple walls, statues and death masks from the time, which depict Ptolemy and his successors in the traditional guise of the Egyptian pharaohs. Nevertheless, Greek was the language of state administration. Greek and Macedonian officials held the most important offices, and during his rules, Ptolemy tended to favor Macedonian and Greek troops over native Egyptian soldiers. Alexandria became the symbol of the new kingdom. This was a cosmopolitan city, home to large populations of Greeks, Jews, Egyptians, and other groups from Asia, Europe, and Africa. There is a debate as to whether Ptolemy founded the museum and library of Alexandria, or if this was his son and successor, Ptolemy II, born around 309 BC to Ptolemy and his wife Berenice. The library, which was part of the Museion, a complex of religious and civic buildings in central Alexandria, attracted scholars from all over the Mediterranean world. The basis for them was probably laid down by Ptolemy I in the 290s or 280s BC, though they would come to real fruition under Ptolemy II. While Ptolemy preferred to allow scholars the independence to pursue their own research, he made an exception for the mathematician Euclid, who wrote his seminal Elements, one of the foundational texts in the field of geometry and mathematics, while living in Alexandria around 300 BC under the king's patronage. Construction of the library remained incomplete at the end of Ptolemy's reign, and it was up to his son Ptolemy II to supervise its completion and organize the institution as the repository of all scholarship in the known world. Ptolemy I was also responsible for the construction of the Pharos Lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The completed structure stood at over 110 meters tall, the tallest man-made structure in the world at the time, with the exception of the pyramids of Giza. Equipped with a reflective mirror at daytime and a burning furnace at night, the light was visible up to 40 miles away, enabling approaching ships to enter the city's harbor safely. In wartime, the structure could also be used to serve as a warning for approaching enemy ships. While Ptolemy was responsible for the design and construction work may have started in 297 BC, it was also unfinished at his death and completed by his successor. Ptolemy was around 84 years old like
he
different
died.
shots,
But
different
as
dating
he
shots,
used two
beautiful shit.
different dating systems
So now
for
we're
his
talking
role,
about on the
it is
plane,
unclear whether he
on the
died in
private jet,
283
yeah?
BC
That's it.
or
It was
282
good.
BC.
It was the first time
He
in my
was
life
succeeded
that I
by
was
his son
served
Ptolemy II
Pringles,
Philadelphus.
Samba,
Then, in
but
his
I
early
actually took
20s,
gushers. There was
his mother
gushers.
Berenice
Who gives
was
gushers out
Ptolemy's
to
fourth
gushers?
and most influential wife.
It was unbelievable.
Ptolemy
That was
II
cool.
may
So
already have
we
been
got to
installed
grab the
as
mic
his
and gave a
father's
little bit of
joint
cheer.
ruler in
And talking about
285
rap,
BC. Not long
retroactive
after displacing his
classification,
elder
and now we're
half-brother
talking about
Ptolemy Coronis,
retroactive
the son of
classification.
Eurydice, as Ptolemy I's preferred successor.
Oh,
At the
okay.
time of Ptolemy I's death, his
We had
rule was at its
dinner
greatest
with
extent,
guys,
but the
local,
wars of the
Moroccan,
successors
and stuff.
was
The whole
not yet
vibe
completely
playing some
over.
Moroccan. I don't even know what they're doing.
Seleucus'
What?
death in
I'm
281
the
BC marked the end of the wars of the successors. More than 40 years after Alexander's death,
Oh,
in
it's not done.
276 BC, Demetrius' son Antigonus Gonatas, grandson of the first Antigonus, defeated the Gauls and established the Antigonid dynasty, which ruled Macedonia and parts of Greece until its conquest by Rome in 168 BC. The Seleucid Empire lasted until 63 BC, when it too was conquered by the Roman general Rabbi the Great, leaving Ptolemaic Egypt as the longest lived of the successor states to the empire of Alexander the Great. Its demise is well known,
Right now.
with
So
Queen
what do you mean
Cleopatra
yes,
VII becoming the lover of
versus
both
this
Julius
case
Caesar
of
and
truth?
Mark Antony
Person
in
has
succession,
one.
as she sought to
Not the
manage
one.
her kingdom's relationship with the now all-powerful Roman
So that
Republic.
is one.
Her
And you want
demise
to
in
be one
30
because
BC,
someone nice is ready for
following the
shots.
civil war between
You don't
Mark
have enough time.
Antony and Octavian
The
Caesar,
shady.
ushered in the birth
You
of the
just say,
Roman
listen,
Empire.
I don't drink the wine right
Thus,
now.
the Ptolemaic dynasty, the
That
Ptolemy
is what I
family,
intended
was
to give
bookended
before I started
on
drinking the
side
wine.
by the demise of the short-lived empire of Alexander the Great,
That's what
and on
I
the other,
You didn't
by the
tell me.
birth
Maybe the
of the
truth
Roman
in the
Empire.
drink. No. Whatever's left over in the bottle.
Ptolemy the First Soter began
That's
his
what I
long
mean.
life in the remoteness of Western Macedonia and ended it as king of Egypt. His connections with the Macedonian elite through his mother enabled him to become an important player at court and a trusted friend of Alexander the Great. But while he served as Alexander's bodyguard and saw action in most of his battles, it is debatable how senior his position was during Alexander's lifetime. He may have exaggerated how close he was to the king in later years, and his propaganda was then absorbed by writers like Arian, who used Ptolemy's own histories when writing their accounts of the conquests of Alexander. Ptolemy came to the fore following Alexander's death, firstly by proposing the division of the empire and claiming for himself the satrapy of Egypt, before defying Perdiccas by stealing Alexander's corpse, which he used to assert his claims as the great king's successor. It was probably at this time that he invented the spurious claim to be Alexander's half-brother in order to galvanize his claim to the throne. He proved to be a successful military leader who orchestrated the demise of Perdiccas and managed to hold his own against figures like Antigonus, Demetrius, and Seleucus for several decades. He established control of the key islands of Cyprus and Rhodes, but was unable to fulfill his ambitions of becoming king of his native Macedon. However, beyond the failure of any one individual such as Ptolemy to win Paul's Diadochi, Ptolemy's work laid the foundations of a dynastic state in Egypt that lasted almost 3 centuries. Most importantly, it was under his leadership that Alexandria began to emerge as the greatest city in the world for a time. A utopian center of learning in the ancient Mediterranean, and a city which, even after the rise of Rome, remained the intellectual center of the Eastern Mediterranean. What do you think of Ptolemy the First Soter? Should he be regarded as an effective military and political leader who left behind a prosperous kingdom in Egypt to his successors, or was this only a partial success in the context of his claims to be the legitimate successor to all of the empire of Alexander the Great? Please let us know in the comment section, and in the meantime, thank you very much for watching.
Sorry, I only learned Torah Shemitav.
Will you hear it today? Stop. I need a separate suit for myself. That's the church of Pep, Stop, Marlon. Very nice. Okay. That's not the one I'm talking about. This is a good one. Okay, here it comes. It's coming up right now. It says the Gemara like this. So if you buy wine from you see. So Rabbi says this is bread. Yuda, here you see the Gemara is proving Rabbi doesn't hold the prayer, he doesn't hold this right. You cannot separate truth and menstruous retroactively. So the Gemara, no. He told you. Maybe over there something special. Other people, many times, there's a great reason why you shouldn't use regular when it comes to the wine. Imagine if you drink Teva, it's listed there, right? It's part of this, right? So, what's the trick? You're going to drink Teva, probably you drink, but it's okay. Why? Because when you have something left on the bottom, that's going to become normalized. And what if you don't do it at the end? What if you drink the whole thing? Then you drink Teva. What if the bottle breaks? What if it spills? So you can't drink, it's going to come out that you drank Teva retroactively. Retroactively, you drink Teva because you never separated fruits and ice. And that's the reason why Rabbi Yehuda, in that case, or maybe in general, in the rest of Shas, he holds a retroactive clarification with Brady. Don't you agree that it's possible that it'll break?
The man lived in history as Pharaoh Akhenaten was born at some unknown date and year, though almost certainly in the 1360s BC. He was certainly alive in 1361 BC, but most likely many years prior to this, 1368 BC or 1367 BC being plausible candidates for the year of his birth. His father was the Pharaoh or king of Egypt, Amenhotep III. Akhenaten was named after his father when he was born, and while he is known to history as Akhenaten, for much of his life he was called Amenhotep. Akhenaten, as we will see, was a name he took himself later in his life. Amenhotep III had been on the throne for around 2 decades by the time Akhenaten was born. Having come to be pharaoh in the early 1380s BC, it is not known where Akhenaten was born. Some Egyptologists have speculated that he may have been born and raised in the ancient city of Memphis, near Heliopolis, a city which had a strong cult of worshipping the sun god Ra. Others contend that he was born around the city of Thebes, the more southerly capital of the Egyptian kingdom in the 14th century BC, approximate to modern day Luxor. There, a major royal palace had been constructed at Malkata by his father, and it would probably make most sense for him to have been born there. Akhenaten's mother was Tia, the great wife of Amenhotep. Egyptian rulers practiced polygamy and had numerous wives, some often being close relatives or even sisters. Amongst these multiple consorts, there was typically a great wife, and a pharaoh's successor would normally be chosen from amongst the sons born to this chief consort. This placed Akhenaten in line to the throne, but he had an older brother who was also born to Tia, Prince Tatorsa. Beyond these, Akhenaten had a very large number of siblings and half-siblings, owing to the polygamous nature of the royal court. The boy that would become Akhenaten one day was born into a part of the world which already
had a very long history by the 14th century BC. Egypt had emerged as far back as the 4th millennium BC as one of the first major centers of Neolithic and Chalcolithic settled civilizations, as people began farming in great numbers along the shores of the River Nile. In ancient times, and indeed prior to the building of the Aswan Dam in the 20th century, the Nile flooded every year. This annual inundation deposited rich alluvial soil onto the banks of the river several hundred meters inland, allowing people here to survive out of the agricultural products grown on these floodplains in an otherwise arid desert environment. Based on this, an advanced culture with a rating system, industry, and other economic elements emerged, and by the middle of the 3rd millennium BC, the pharaohs or kings of the Old Kingdom were in a position to deploy resources capable of building the Great Pyramid on the Giza Plateau, next to modern-day Cairo. Unsurprisingly, a complex religious system also developed, one which lionized deities like Osiris, the god of the River Nile, on which the people were so reliant for their subsistence, and Ra, the sun god, who was so central to the lives of people who otherwise lived in the midst of the Sahara Desert. This pharaonic society had peaked early in the middle of the 3rd millennium BC, as the rulers of what is termed the Old Kingdom built the greatest of the pyramids. Thereafter, it went through peaks and valleys. For instance, the 22nd and 21st centuries BC were turbulent ones of unrest in Egypt, but thereafter the Middle Kingdom was a new period of growth. A fresh bout of chaos came in the 17th century BC, when a people called the Hyksos descended from the Levant into northern Egypt, conquered the Nile Delta and much of the north of the country from the Egyptian kings. For a period of a century and a half, Egypt was divided and harassed by the Hyksos. Yet they too were conquered over time, and in the 15th century BC, Akhenaten's great-great-grandfather, Thutmose III, had overseen Egypt's rise to a position of unprecedented national power and wealth. Ruling for over half a century, he reunified Egypt fully, extended its power further down the Nile to what we now call Sudan, and also conquered much of the Levant into regions approximating today with Palestine, Israel, and even towards Jordan and into parts of Syria and Lebanon. Trade flourished across the eastern Mediterranean, and an ambitious building program was initiated. This period of immense Egyptian power, which Thutmose was the greatest ruler of, is called the New Kingdom period of Egyptian history. Akhenaten would benefit from succeeding to the throne, as Egypt was in such a propitious position of power, but his reign would also stand as a period of turmoil within it. As the shadowy details of his birth would indicate, there is almost nothing known about Akhenaten's early life. But such is the interest in the reign of one of the most unusual and significant of ancient Egypt's rulers that many theories have emerged over the years. One holds that he was raised to a significant extent away from the royal capital of Memphis in the north, near where Cairo stands today. Here it is posited that he was a high priest of the god Ptah, the god of workers and industry in the Egyptian religious system. We know that his older brother, Prince Thutmose, served as high priest of Ptah as well for several years before he headed south to begin training as his father's successor at Thebes. The suggestion is that Akhenaten succeeded him in that role afterwards, and it may have been this time in his youth as a high priest that imbued Akhenaten with strong religious sensibilities. Other theories concern his education, with several well-known scribes at the time being suggested as possible tutors of the prince. We can be certain that one of these, a man named Parenifer, did indeed tutor young Akhenaten in his childhood years, as this Parenifer was later honoured with a major tomb, where an inscription notes his role in educating the pharaoh. Parenifer would also go on to become the senior-most minister in Akhenaten's government in later years, and seems to have been a major influence on Akhenaten's life and reign. Some greater clarity is possible when it comes to Akhenaten's wives and children, though there is still a lot that remains speculative even in this area. One thing is for sure, his great wife or chief wife was a woman by the name of Nefertiti. They were married at some stage in the 1350s, and so she and he were most likely wed when they were little more than teenagers. They may have been closely related, with some Egyptologists claiming that she was a first cousin of Akhenaten's, or some other near relation within the Egyptian royal line. She was quite possibly a few years older than him. Nefertiti is one of the most famous royal women in the entirety of Egyptian history. This is based on multiple developments. The first being her position as chief wife to Akhenaten, who had become one of the most notorious of all ancient Egypt's pharaohs. Secondly, she is famous for a remarkable Barcelona statue of her head and neck that has survived over 3 millennia. The painted limestone bust was created around 1345 BC by a famous royal sculptor of the time by the name of Tasso. Discovered in 1912 during archaeological work at the city of Amarna, it presents one of the most vivid portraits of any Bronze Age woman to have come down to us. Finally, Nefertiti is well known for most likely being the mother of Tutankhamun, the pharaoh whose gold death mask, discovered by Howard Carter back in 1922, has become a defining symbol of ancient Egypt. Beyond this, she is also a good example of a royal consort who appears to have held a position of extensive political power in New Kingdom Egypt. Akhenaten had several other wives beyond Nefertiti. One was Kia, a name which is believed to have been a shortened version of Tetukipa. If so, she most likely was a princess of the Mitanni royal family, a people who ruled an area around Kurdistan today, where the borders of Turkey, Syria, and Iraq meet. Accordingly, her marriage to Akhenaten would be political to cement diplomatic relations between Egypt and a near neighbor. Other scholars of Akhenaten's reign argue that Kia and Tetukipa were two different wives. Kia was nevertheless most likely of foreign blood, as she is described in some inscriptions as being Akhenaten's favorite wife, one who evidently could not rise to the position of great wife, as she, unlike Nefertiti, was not of Egyptian blood. Akhenaten also possibly married a daughter of the ruler of Babylon in Mesopotamia, though her name is unknown, while there is speculation that he was married to an unidentified sister of his. From amongst these marriages, Akhenaten had many children. His marriage to Nefertiti resulted in several more children, most of them daughters. There were numerous other children from his other unions, though the exact details of these cannot be reconstructed from the available evidence, and there would doubtlessly have been some who died in infancy as well, for which no record of their existence has survived. Akhenaten's earlier years were lived in knowledge that his older brother, Prince Tutmosis, was their father's designated successor, and so he would succeed as pharaoh upon the third's death. But Tutmosis died sometime in the early to mid-1350s. With this, Akhenaten became the new heir, and so from the mid-1350s, by which time he was most likely only just entering his teenage years, he began to co-rule with his father, an arrangement which was usually established to train in a successor in the key elements of government and the religious obligations of the pharaoh. There would also have been a growing awareness of the fact that Amenhotep perhaps did not have long left to live. Statues and other visible depictions of the pharaoh dating to the 1350s depict a ruler who looks to have been aged and sick, while DNA evidence from his mummy indicates he may have been suffering from obesity and arthritis, though he was still only in his 40s. Incidentally, contrary to some popular views that the Egyptians had very effective forms of dental care, Amenhotep was also suffering by the time Akhenaten became co-ruler from teeth that were plagued with cavities and which would have caused him serious pain. It was this obese, arthritic, and pain-ridden figure who managed to rule down to around 1351 BC, though perhaps as late as 1349 BC. Upon his death, Akhenaten ascended as pharaoh in his own right, initially with the regal name Amenhotep IV, though he would soon change it to Akhenaten. The first years of Akhenaten's person were distinct from what followed. The 4 or 5 years in question, down to 1346 BC, have been termed the Karnak years by some Egyptologists to indicate that he was still continuing to rule in a regular fashion from the seat of government near the temple of Karnak in the capital of Thebes, on the course of the north in central Egypt. He was most likely crowned here, though possibly at Memphis, the ancient capital of the Old Kingdom. There are also inscriptions and other documentary and material evidence from the early 1340s which point towards Akhenaten continuing to worship multiple ancient Egyptian gods such as Ra, Amun, Ptah, Hathor, and Nekhbet, while textual inscriptions also refer to the gods in plural. He also continued to develop the city of Thebes, a metropolis which was at the heart of a rich and energetic kingdom. The late Bronze Age was a period of immense vitality and wealth of a kind, which would not be seen again until the Greek culture of the 6th and 5th centuries BC. Thebes was at the very heart of this, a bustling city where industries like stone cutting, painting, glass making, pottery making, and other crafts, as well as professional schools for scribes, medics, and other skilled workers flourished. Furthermore, with a possible population of between 80 and 100,000 people, there is a chance Thebes was the largest city in the world at that time. Life here in the first few years of Akhenaten's reign would have appeared perfectly normal. Few could have predicted what a strange turn things were about to take. Another feature of these Karnak years was Akhenaten's completion of some of the building projects, which his father had initiated during his long reign of some 4 decades. This focused on the mortuary site which Amenhotep had developed at Kol El Heb, across the Nile River from the city of Thebes. The majority of the mortuary temple here has been destroyed over the centuries, but the layout of it can be reconstructed. It would have consisted of rows of pylons, indoor sanctums, and outdoor sun courts, so that there was an interplay of light and dark along all ways. This was a standard practice of ancient Egyptian religious buildings, and if rituals were held here at specific times of the day, the shafts of light penetrating through specific parts of the building would have made a deep impression on participants in rituals here, particularly where gold objects were used to refract the sun's rays in different ways. It all points to the way the sun was already central to the Egyptian religious system, and provides a backdrop to the religious changes Akhenaten was about to undertake. Elsewhere in the building, 2 gigantic statues were erected, known today as the Colossi of Memnon. These 60-foot-high stone monuments loomed over the western bank of the River Nile, and could not have failed to impress people voyaging up and down the river on boats. The building work on the temple and the carving of the Colossi was also completed around 1350 BC, most likely just after Akhenaten had become pharaoh in his own right, and he would have overseen the rituals, which no doubt accompanied the solemnizing of the new temple structure. The first years of Akhenaten's reign were normative in other respects. He continued to add to the great temple within the city precinct on the right bank of the Nile from Thebes. Here there is even an inscription depicting the new pharaoh making offerings to the god of Ra. Though elsewhere there was a subtle profusion of shrines and other religious spaces dedicated to the sun god Aten in the early 1340s. Elsewhere in Thebes, Akhenaten oversaw a said festival in the 2nd or 3rd year of his reign. This was in itself a rather peculiar move on his part. Said festivals were the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a royal jubilee. They were typically only held after 20 or 30 years of the same pharaoh being ruler of the kingdom, and then every 3 or 4 years thereafter. According to within a few years of succession, Akhenaten was indicating his willingness to break with tradition. His motive in doing so may have been a desire to establish continuity between his own reign and that of his father, and it is noted that the date of it may have fallen around the 40th anniversary of Amenhotep III's succession. If this is so, perhaps Akhenaten felt some vulnerability about having been a younger son and only emerging as the heir and then pharaoh in the course of the 1350s. The said festival may have been organized in an effort to proclaim the legitimacy of his reign and cement his status as the new pharaoh.
Over there,
While there were normative elements to Akhenaten's reign during its first years, it would soon take a dramatic turn that has created an infamous position for the pharaoh within the history of ancient Egypt. The shift came in 1346 BC, though for how long Akhenaten had been considering this new cause, or why he decided upon it at this time remains a mystery. The answer, this was a deity button, also spelled Atu, Atum, or Eden, with various other references to him on tablet inscriptions. The word itself derives from Old King Egyptian and refers effectively to a disc or sun disc. Therefore, in its earliest incarnation, the name Atum was used simply as a noun to refer to the spherical or disc-like appearance of the sun when viewed in the sky. Over time, the term Atum became one which was used to refer to a sun deity or god. Atum was just one such sun god. The most popular and important of these was Ra, one of the most important of all the Egyptian gods and goddesses, one who was said to travel through the sky in arc every day and light the world. Evening retired and night fell. Atum was just one of over a dozen deities which emerged around the worship of the sun day and night in Egypt over the centuries.